Chapter 1679. Lu Ye's current position was already at the limit of what he could endure. Although the ancient environment of this starry sky wonder didn't affect him much, the deeper he went, the more intense the grinding force was. It wasn't something he could ignore. The formless grinding force was extremely wondrous. Lu Ye had been fleeing all this time and hadn't had the time to carefully observe it. Only now that he had calmed down he noticed it. It was as if his body really was inside an invisible millstone, and every inch of his flesh and blood was being strangely ground. His spiritual power didn't change and still flowed as before, but his flesh and blood began to move rhythmically under this wondrous grinding force. Lu Ye tried to resist this rhythm, but found that the more he resisted, the more intense the grinding force became. Soon his skin began to crack and dark red blood flowed out. He was secretly shocked. He was secretly shocked. The strange grinding power was so strong. One had to know that his physique was currently the strongest in the constellation realm. Just this level of resistance was enough to injure him. If this continued, the consequences would only be more serious. Moreover, in the process of resisting this rhythm, Lu Ye found that not only did his flesh and blood suffer some damage, but even his blood and qi began to show signs of weakening. This was an inconceivable matter. After pondering for a moment, he decided not to resist this wondrous rhythm, but to observe the changes. Soon, Lu Ye revealed a look of surprise because under the effects of this wondrous grinding force, he clearly felt that his physique, which had been tempered to the limit, was continuing to improve. He was greatly surprised because he felt that he had already reached the limit of the constellation realm. His physique should have also been tempered to the limit. Otherwise, he wouldn't have comprehended the bloodline inheritance of the blood tribe and condensed treasure blood. But in fact, what he thought was the limit was actually not the limit. In addition to being surprised, he was also happy because he still had room for improvement. This way, the more solid his constellation realm foundation was, the stronger he would be when he advanced to the lunar and solar illumination realms in the future. A cultivator's cultivation in the upper three realms mainly focused on tempering their essence, qi, and spirit. The reason why the essence of the physique was the first to be tempered was naturally because the physical body was the foundation of a cultivator. After that, the qi of the lunar jade realm and the spirit of the solar illumination realm were all built on the foundation of essence. The stronger the foundation, the more powerful the qi and spirit it could bear. Coming to this yin-yang millstone was the right choice. Fortunately, the reincarnation tree had reminded him. Otherwise, Lu Ye wouldn't have remembered to come all the way here. Even though he could still come here to temper his body after he became a Yu Yao, he wouldn't be able to benefit as much as he did now. What a cultivator should do at a certain stage, and which aspect of cultivation they should focus on were all fixed. At this moment, the many Yu Yao cultivating in the yin-yang great millstone were probably trying to make up for the deficiencies in their foundations. However, it was hard to say how much they would benefit. The invisible grinding force continued to work, and the rhythm of his flesh and blood did not stop for even a moment. Under this rhythm, Lu Ye felt that his body had been strengthened yet again. 2 days later, the pressure slowly disappeared. Lu Ye got up and headed deeper into the forest. Originally, this position was already his limit, and it was not good for him to go any deeper. However, after his physique was strengthened, his original limit was obviously broken. It wasn't until Lu Ye reached another extreme point that he stopped. The grinding force here was undoubtedly stronger than where he had been before. Lu Ye once again experienced the feeling of being continuously ground into a millstone. His flesh and blood wriggled violently again. Lu Ye went deeper and deeper, breaking his own limits again and again. This kind of cultivation was addictive. Lu Ye completely forgot about the passage of time. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to see where his true limits were. In the beginning he could still sense the auras of some of the powerful Yu Yao cultivating here. However, as he continued to go deeper, he couldn't even see the Yu Yao's figure anymore. This didn't mean that his physique was stronger than those Yu Yao's. Instead, it was because he could ignore the suppression of this ancient environment. He had an innate advantage over those Yu Yao. On the other hand, those Yu Yao cultivators were suppressed by the environment here, and it was hard to say how much of their strength they could unleash. The reincarnation tree probably didn't expect Lu Ye to be able to go so deep. It would actually give some pointers to every cultivator it thought highly of. However, since ancient times there weren't many who could reach Lu Ye's level. Part of the reason was naturally because his foundation was incomparably solid. Another part of the reason was because he had refined countless holy blood and obtained the inheritance of the blood tribe. This was especially true after the birth of the precious blood, which allowed his physique to far surpass that of cultivators of the same cultivation level. It could be said that he had an extremely huge potential when it came to tempering his physique to the limit. However, he hadn't noticed this potential before. He even mistakenly thought that he had already tempered his physique to the limit. Now, through the terrifying grinding force of the yin-yang millstone, this potential was slowly being unearthed. As a result, he was able to break through his limits again and go deeper into the yin-yang millstone. Lu Yi slowly understood all of this. He naturally wanted to know where his limits were. As time passed, he gradually sensed that the strengthening of his physique was slowing down, and the breaking of his limits was also becoming more and more stable. Although it was a pity, he knew that a person's limits couldn't be endless. There would always be a true end. Right now he was about to reach the true end. Of course, this was only the end of the constellation realm. When he reached the Yu Yao realm or the Sunshine realm, the limits of his physique would be greatly improved. He was very satisfied. If he hadn't come here, he would have already reached the Yu Yao realm in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Although he was still powerful, his potential as a constellation realm cultivator hadn't been fully stimulated. This would ultimately affect his future growth. Until a certain moment, when Lu Yi felt that his potential was about to reach its true limit, a buzzing sound came from his body, as if something had been broken. An indescribable feeling of comfort spread from inside to outside, causing Lu Yi to feel as if his entire body and mind had been elevated. The qi and blood in his body surged like lava, rumbling like thunder. The space between his eyebrows suddenly became extremely hot, and all his qi and blood rapidly flowed toward that location. Lu Yi couldn't help but frown, not knowing what was going on. However, when he calmed his mind and sensed his body, he didn't find anything abnormal. As his qi and blood flowed, the space between his eyebrows became hotter and hotter. Just as Lu Yi was about to reach his limit, the burning sensation suddenly disappeared and was replaced by boundless comfort. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment. He clenched his fists lightly, feeling as if his entire body was filled with an extremely violent power. If he could kill a late-stage constellation realm cultivator with a single saber strike before this, then he could destroy them with a single punch now. After tempering his physique to its true limit, the boost to his physical strength was simply terrifying. With this kind of strength, coupled with his saber techniques, Lu Yi felt that he could even defeat Yu Yao. In the past, he definitely wouldn't have been able to do so. Over the years he had fought with several Yu Yaos. Most of the time, he had been assisted by Li Shang's soul. Even in its soul state, he could only put up a fight against Yu Yao who had just broken through. However, even without Li Shang's help, Lu Yi was confident that he could kill Yu Yao who had just broken through, just like Yu Ling. Moreover, he felt as if there was something extra between his eyebrows. He hurriedly rummaged through his storage ring and took out a mirror-like spirit treasure. He looked at himself. However, he found nothing. Lu Yi was a little suspicious. The burning sensation between his eyebrows just now was clearly not an illusion. Moreover, he also felt as if there was something extra between his eyebrows, but why couldn't he see it? After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi fiercely activated his qi and blood power. As his qi and blood power surged, when it reached a limit, the scene in his field of vision finally changed. There was indeed something between his eyebrows. It was just that it didn't show up normally. Only when he activated his qi and blood power to the limit would that thing appear. Upon closer inspection, that thing looked like a star-shaped mark, embellished in the center between his eyebrows. It was blood red in color, bright and glistening. What's this? Lu Yi didn't understand. He had never heard of anyone else possessing something like this at the peak of the constellation realm. However, he could feel that this thing wouldn't do him any harm. As for benefits, it didn't seem to have any. It wouldn't appear normally. Only when he activated his qi and blood power to the limit would it appear. In other words, it would only appear when he was putting his life on the line. Looks like I'll have to ask the reincarnation tree the next time I see it. Even though he couldn't figure out what was so special about this star-shaped mark, he was certain that he had completed his mission at the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. This was probably why the reincarnation tree had directed him to this place. It was time to advance Yu Yao's cultivation. If it were any other cultivator, it would naturally be best if they had the help of a corresponding treasure when advancing Yu Yao's cultivation. This was because that would increase their chances of success. It would be even better if they could advance in a special environment like the Constellation Hall. Lu Yi had also planned to advance in the Constellation Hall before. However, ever since he discovered some of its secrets, he knew that there was no need for him to do so. This was because whether it was advancing in the Constellation Hall or using a corresponding treasure, it was all for the sake of purifying his own spiritual power. Ever since Lu Yi started cultivating, his spiritual power had been pure and flawless. Naturally, there was no need for him to rely on any external help. And all of this was thanks to the talent tree. The talent tree's incinerating power allowed him to consume spiritual pills or refine other types of energy without any impurities. As for the other cultivators, it was a different story. Needless to say, all spirit pills contained pill toxins. Even the so-called top-grade spirit pills outside also existed. It was just that the pill toxins in the top-grade spirit pills were very weak. Refining spiritual jades would also refine some impurities that were almost undetectable into one's body. There was no need to worry about them for a short period of time. However, once too many impurities accumulated, they would become a huge obstacle to a cultivator's cultivation. End of chapter. Chapter 1680. Before a cultivator ascended from a constellation to a moon, they would try their best to purify their spiritual energy and minimize the impurities in their spiritual energy. The purity and strength of a cultivator's spiritual energy were directly related to the potential of a Yu-Yao cultivator. This was the same principle as when a cultivator first opened their spiritual cavities in the spirit stream realm. The more spiritual cavities one opened, the greater one's potential would be in the future. It could even be said that if the number of spiritual cavities opened did not reach a certain level, one would forever be stuck in a certain realm. Lu Yi didn't need to purify his spiritual energy. It could be said that his foundation was perfect. What he needed to do was very simple. He just needed to activate the dragonization art and convert his spiritual energy into magic energy. When his spiritual energy was converted into magic energy, it would be the time for him to advance to Yu-Yao. Although the grinding power of this place could no longer cause him any harm, there was still a certain degree of pressure when advancing in this place. As such, Lu Yi decided to head to the outer perimeter. The grinding power outside had less of an effect on him. He just needed to find a spot that wouldn't affect his advancement. After making up his mind, Lu Yi immediately set off. After only one day he stopped. The grinding power at this location was still strong for ordinary cultivators, but to him, it was like a light breeze. This was the place. If he had any other choice, Lu Yi didn't want to break through Yu Yao's bottleneck here. After all, he might be disturbed in a place like this. That wouldn't be a good thing. If he failed at a critical moment, he would regret it for the rest of his life. However, there was still a late-stage Yu Yao outside. Lu Yi was certain that the other party had not left and was still waiting for him. If Yu Yao did not become a late-stage Yu Yao, Lu Yi was not confident that he would be able to escape. He would have to properly settle this debt when he returned. Before ascending, Lu Yi released his 3 treasured blood clones to protect him in 3 different directions. After reaching the peak of the constellation realm, the precious blood doppelganger seemed to have undergone a huge change. Lu Yi could clearly feel that his 3 doppelgangers were much stronger than before. If it weren't for the fact that this place wasn't suitable for setting up an array formation, Lu Yi would have set up one no matter what. But now that the conditions were simple and crude, he could only make do with it. He felt that it wouldn't take long for him to become a Yu Yao. He calmed himself down and activated the dragonization art. In the cultivation world, there were many dragonization arts. This kind of art was not used for cultivation, nor could it provide any help to a cultivator to increase their strength. Its only use was to allow the cultivator to guide the conversion of spiritual energy. Lu Yi had quite a number of dragonization skills. Some of them came from the Mermaid clan, some were contributed by Ghost, and some were bought from the Myriad Elephant trading firm. Dragonization arts were not worth much in the universe. Lu Yi had already found the dragonization art that was most suitable for him. At this moment, he only needed to circulate his spirit energy according to the art's route. Lu Yi's spirit energy surged and began to flow according to the dragon transformation art. Although he was not very familiar with it and the flow was not very fast, gradually the spirit energy flowed faster and faster. Gradually, it formed a movement like a surging river in Lu Yi's body. After a few hundred circulations, Lu Yi could clearly feel a burning sensation coming from his lower abdomen, which was where his source spiritual aperture was originally located. Under the guidance of the dragonization art, all the spiritual energy in his body gathered and filled that spot. Lu Yi could clearly feel the swelling in his spiritual source acupoint. He felt the barrier he hadn't felt in a long time. How many years had it been? He had only felt the barrier when he was in the spirit stream realm and opened his spiritual acupoints. He didn't expect to feel it again after reaching the pinnacle of the constellation realm. However, the barrier he felt now was not the same as the one he felt in the spirit stream realm. What was similar was that the barrier of the spiritual acupoints needed to be broken. Back then, the barrier was broken to open the spiritual acupoints. Now, the barrier was broken to become a Yu Yao. As his spiritual energy continued to gather, the swelling became more and more intense. However, Lu Yi didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. He increased his strength, and as his spiritual energy circulated faster, the invisible barrier shattered. This was the advantage of having a good foundation. Because his spiritual energy was pure enough and his foundation was strong enough, breaking the invisible barrier wasn't too difficult. This step was actually the most dangerous moment for him to become a Yu Yao. Because his spiritual source acupoint had already been broken, if he couldn't complete the next step smoothly, becoming a Yu Yao would become an extravagant hope. Moreover, the cultivator's strength would greatly weaken because of the destruction of his spiritual source acupoint. This kind of weakening was irreversible. Back when Li Baxin was in the spirit stream realm, his spiritual source acupoint had been broken. Later on, Lu Yi had given him an aperture replenishing pill to repair it. However, his spiritual source acupoint had not been broken, but an ordinary spiritual source acupoint, so it could be repaired. If the spiritual source acupoint was broken, it would be very difficult to repair it in this world. In that instant, the dragon transformation art was circulated to its peak. The spiritual energy in his body flowed at an unprecedented speed. Almost at the instant the spiritual source acupoint was broken, the condensed spiritual energy seemed to undergo a miraculous change. A weak flame rose from the original location of the spiritual source acupoint. This was the sublimation of Lu Ye's fire-type spiritual energy. The spiritual source. The Yu Yao was the source of a cultivator's magic energy. It was also the most obvious sign that a cultivator was about to become a Yu Yao from a constellation. Basically, as long as a cultivator could condense their own spiritual source, they would be considered to have successfully become a Yu Yao. However, Lu Yi didn't stop the dragon transformation art. Because the spiritual source was just formed, it was still very weak. Directly looking at it, this weak flame seemed like it would be extinguished at any moment. Lu Yi still needed to use this newly formed spiritual source to convert all of his spiritual energy into magic energy. Only then could he be considered to have truly advanced. Otherwise, even though he had a spiritual source now, his spiritual energy still hadn't been completely converted. It would be a bit strange. Under the dragon transformation art's activation, his spiritual energy continuously converged into the small flame, as if it was fuel. As more spiritual energy was poured into it, the small flame gradually grew brighter. More than half a day later, Lu Ye's spiritual energy was completely depleted. All of it had been poured into his spiritual source. Only then did he rest. The originally weak flame was now just a small flame. However, its brightness couldn't be compared to before. At this moment, there was no spiritual energy flowing in Lu Ye's body. Apart from the foundation of his physique, all of his energy had been gathered in his spiritual source. This was the biggest difference between Yu Yao and Yu Yao. Under Yu Yao, a cultivator's spiritual energy was constantly circulating in their body, regardless of whether they were in a normal state or in a battle state. However, Yu Yao wasn't like that. Under normal circumstances, Yu Yao's magic energy was extremely restrained and concentrated in their spiritual source. Only when it was needed would the magic energy be produced from their spiritual source for the cultivator to use and control. After successfully advancing to Yu Yao, the next cultivation step was to continuously strengthen this small flame. Only when its essence changed would Lu Ye's realm be able to advance. Every Yu Yao's spiritual source had a different form, especially for Yu Yao of different attributes. Lu Ye's spiritual source looked like a small flame. Perhaps some Yu Yao were like water droplets, some were like saplings, and some were even like a lump of dirt. However, no matter what form it took, it was just a condensation of the cultivator's own power. Lu Yi slowly opened his eyes. With a thought, magic energy began to flow in his body. He felt like he was exploding with power. During this trip to the Yin-Yang Great Millstone, his strength had increased twice. One was a small increase and the other was a large increase. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. In the future, he wouldn't have to worry about his strength being inferior to his enemies. Using his spiritual energy to clash with someone else's magic energy was simply too disadvantageous. It was like trying to smash an egg against a rock. Now that he also had magic energy in his body, he wouldn't be unable to withstand a single blow like before. Of course, if he were to fight against Ri, it would probably still be the same. Although Ri's power was also magic energy, his realm was too high. Yu Yao wouldn't be able to contend against him. If Lu Yi was confident that he could defeat a newly advanced Yu Yao like Guiling after his physique had been tempered to the extreme, then now that he had advanced to Yu Yao, Lu Yi felt that Guiling wouldn't be able to withstand a few blows from him. Just as he was thinking this, the mountain plate saber at his waist suddenly vibrated. Oh? Lu Yi lowered his head in confusion. Although the mountain plate saber was transformed from Fang, ever since he subdued it, Fang had become like an inanimate object. This was a special characteristic of the soldier tribe. Only when there was no master would the soldier tribe's consciousness awaken. When the soldier tribe had a master, they were truly inanimate objects. Therefore, Lu Yi found it very strange that the mountain plate saber was reacting even though he hadn't activated it. Fang had awakened? Thinking this, Lu Yi prepared to pull out the mountain plate saber to take a look. But just as his hand touched the hilt of the mountain plate saber, he raised his eyebrows. The moment he touched the hilt of the mountain plate saber gave him a feeling of hunger and thirst. That feeling was like a person who had been hungry for a long time and had seen delicious food. Although Lu Yi had never encountered such a thing before, he quickly realized what was going on. Without hesitation, he activated his magic energy and poured it into the mountain plate saber. The blade shook and started to devour the magic energy. Lu Yi originally thought that the mountain plate saber wouldn't be able to devour much magic energy, so he didn't pay much attention to it. However, as his magic energy continued to decrease, and the small flame representing his magic source continued to dim, he realized that something was wrong. He hurriedly took out a large amount of spirit jades from his storage ring and placed them beside him. Then he activated the power of his talent tree and started to devour the magic energy. When a cultivator advanced to Yu Yao, their cultivation resources were still mainly spirit jades. Of course, refining spirit jades still gave them spiritual energy. However, through the conversion of their magic source, the spiritual energy would become magic energy. The efficiency of the conversion was related to the quality of their magic source. Although Lu Yi had just advanced, his foundation was extremely solid, so the quality of his magic source wasn't low. Thus, the efficiency of his conversion of spiritual energy was much higher than that of other newly advanced Yu Yao. Even so, he still found it difficult to persist. Chapter 1681. The coiling mountain saber quickly devoured his magic power, but the saber was still ravenous. If this went on, his magic power would be completely devoured. Of course, Lu Yi could stop the devouring process as long as he removed his hand from the coiling mountain saber's hilt. He could probably continue the process in the future, but he didn't want to stop now that he realized what was happening. If spirit jades didn't work, then spirit crystals would do. As a cultivation resource of a higher level than spirit jades, a cultivator would still only obtain spiritual power when refining spirit crystals, which also needed to be converted by their source. However, compared to spirit jades, spirit crystals contained much more spiritual power, and could allow a cultivator to replenish their energy in the same amount of time. Lu Yi had spirit crystals. When he first made a deal with the mermaid clan, they had given him 1,000,000 spirit crystals. He hadn't used them all this time, and now was the perfect time to put them to good use. Lu Yi felt much better after the talent tree devoured the spirit crystal's energy. 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. After consuming half of the 1,000,000 spirit crystals, the coiling mountain saber's devouring power gradually weakened. Half a day later, the devouring power finally disappeared. Lu Yi looked down and saw a cold light flowing through the coiling mountain saber. The coiling mountain saber, which was originally only a spirit artifact, seemed to have been sublimated in an instant. Lu Yi was physically and mentally exhausted, but his expression was full of excitement. He slowly pulled out the saber, and the pitch-black coiling mountain saber entered his eyes. On the surface there were no changes. It was the same as before. However, Lu Yi could tell that his mountain pan saber had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. A magic treasure. Right now, the mountain plate saber was already a magic treasure. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary magic treasure. It was definitely a top-notch magic treasure. This wasn't an increase in the quality of the coiling mountain saber, but more like a release of a seal. The coiling mountain saber, which was formed from qi, was of high quality. After all, it had followed many powerful cultivators, and in the hands of those cultivators, it couldn't be used. However, the soldier tribe's special characteristic was just that mysterious. When Lu Yi subdued it, it would only transform into a spirit artifact, so that Lu Yi wouldn't be able to control it. It was as if it had placed a seal on itself. But today Lu Yi had become a Yu Yao. After devouring a large amount of Lu Ye's magic power, the seal on the pyrolite had been undone, and the pyrolite had become a top-grade magic treasure. Lu Yi held the mountain pan saber in front of him. He looked at it carefully, his expression pleased. He raised his hand slightly and wiped the blade. He felt a sharp pain and fresh blood flowed out. His finger had been cut open. How sharp! The coiling mountain saber was already sharp enough when it was still a spirit treasure. Now that it had been unsealed and become a Dharma treasure, it was undoubtedly even sharper. Otherwise, with Lu Ye's current physique, he wouldn't have been injured so easily by the blade. Just this sharpness alone was obviously not something an ordinary magic weapon could possess. If it was supplemented by Lu Ye's divine edge spirit pattern, this sharpness would definitely reach a higher level. Moreover, it was sturdy enough. Because its quality was extremely high, Lu Ye didn't have to worry about his weapon being damaged when it clashed with an enemy. Instead, it was his enemy who had to worry about that. If Lu Ye had felt that the newly promoted Yu Yao wouldn't be able to withstand a few slashes from him, then now that he had a Dharma treasure-level saber, he would probably be able to defeat Yu Yao with a single slash. Unless Yu Yao had the ability to block the sharpness of his blade, this was undoubtedly the huge boost a top-grade weapon could bring to a weapon cultivator. Are you full? Lu Ye looked at the mountain pan saber in his hand and murmured softly. He didn't expect to receive any response. Unexpectedly, the mountain pan saber hummed slightly. Immediately after, a voice sounded from the depths of his mind. 30% full. Lu Ye was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed. You're awake. However, he didn't receive any response. Lu Ye guessed that Pyrolite's consciousness had been awakened for a moment after he had become a Yu Yao and broken the seal. Now it had fallen silent again. But, 30% full? Disregarding the magic power he had consumed and the large number of spirit jades, he had consumed more than 500,000 spirit crystals. If converted into spirit jades, that would be 5 million spirit jades. And yet, Pyrolite had only eaten 30% full? Lu Ye's mind raced. Judging from Liao's words, Pyrolite's current state clearly wasn't its limit. Perhaps he would only be able to witness Pyrolite's true might after his cultivation reached a higher level. Pyrolite was already a top-grade Dharma treasure when it was only 30% full. If it fully recovered, what grade would it be? A Starry Sky Supreme Treasure? That was unlikely. After all, Starry Sky Supreme Treasures were generally born in the Starry Sky. Although the weapon race was ancient, they shouldn't have reached the level of a Starry Sky Supreme Treasure yet. Regardless, Lu Ye's heart was filled with anticipation. A few million spirit jades in exchange for a top-grade Dharma treasure. Moreover, it was a saber Dharma treasure that Lu Ye was most comfortable with. This was undoubtedly a great deal. Lu Ye casually twirled the saber and examined it with satisfaction for a moment. Then he put away the mountain pan saber. Lu Ye then recalled the treasured blood clones that were scattered around to protect him. Only then did he begin to recover. The spirit jades he took out were continuously swallowed and refined. Then they were converted into magic power through the source origin in his body. Lu Ye's mind was immersed. He stared at the small flame in his source spiritual cavity and sensed the efficiency of his source origin's conversion. He realized that he should think of a way to improve the quality of his source origin. After all, this was related to his future cultivation speed. In the Starry Sky, Dharma treasures were ranked from 1 star to 9 stars. This was a classification system that came from the reincarnation tree. It was also a system recognized by the entire Starry Sky. However, under normal circumstances, Dharma treasures were most commonly ranked from 3 to 5 stars. True 1 or 2 stars Dharma treasures were actually very rare. This was because the quality was too low and Yu Yao didn't care for them. Moreover, any cultivator with even a little bit of refining skills wouldn't only refine 1 or 2 stars trash. The quality of source origin was also ranked from 1 to 9 stars. It was said that this classification system was inherited from the classification of Dharma treasures. Coincidentally, Yu Yao's source origin was most commonly ranked from 3 to 5 stars. Although treasures used to improve the quality of source origin were expensive, Yu Yao, who came from a large faction, had the ability to improve her source origin to 5 stars or above. However, doing so would be a waste. This was because the efficiency of converting Dharma power wasn't the same as the efficiency of cultivation. Cultivation in the constellation realm was very simple. One only needed to refine spirit jades or other cultivation resources and convert them into their own spiritual power. However, Yu Yao's cultivation undoubtedly had an additional layer. She had to absorb spiritual power and convert it into Dharma power. The efficiency of converting Dharma power depended on the quality of the source origin. However, no matter how high the quality of the source origin was, it was useless if it couldn't increase the efficiency of absorbing spiritual power. Therefore, for the Yu Yao in the Starry Sky, a 3 to 5 star source origin was enough. Any higher and she wouldn't need it. Only when her cultivation reached the Sunshine Realm would she think of ways to continue improving the quality of her source origin to increase the efficiency of converting Dharma power. However, in this vast starry sky, how many Yu Yao could successfully break through to the Sunshine Realm? Lu Yi didn't know what the quality of his source origin was. He could only wait until he returned to the 10,000 Elephant Sea to test it. The 10,000 Elephant Chamber of Commerce had something that specialized in testing the quality of source origin. According to his estimation, his source origin couldn't be too bad. At the very least, it should be 3 stars. For Yu Yao, who had just broken through, this was already a very good result. However, it still wasn't enough. Compared to other cultivators, his efficiency of refining spiritual jades and other cultivation resources was too high. The conversion speed of his 3-star source origin couldn't keep up with his cultivation at all. Lu Yi couldn't help but feel a little melancholy. It seemed like his cultivation had always been burning spiritual jades. In the past, he'd only needed to buy some fire-type treasures as fuel for his talent tree and plunge into the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Now, he had to think of a way to improve the quality of his source origin. Every single thing required money. Although he relied on the Merfolk clan's territory, there would come a day when he ran out of money. Moreover, the Merfolk clan's mining speed was limited. Moreover, the Merfolk clan and the 3 World Islands cultivators also needed spiritual jades for their cultivation. He could only think of a way in the future. Lu Yi tossed aside all the distracting thoughts in his mind and focused on refining spiritual jades. 2 days later, he was completely refreshed. He could feel that the upper limit of his physique had increased after he broke through to Yu Yao. In other words, his physique, which had been tempered to the extreme in the constellation realm, was no longer the limit now. He could enter the Yin-Yang Great Millstone and continue tempering his physique. However, he wasn't prepared to do so. There was no other reason. During this period of time, he'd already used up all the spirit pills and spirit herbs that the Flower Clan had given him to replenish his soul power. Even the 1,000 soul jades he'd taken from the Soul Clan were only left with 300. Although the World King flower on the Rainbow Divine Lotus didn't put much of a burden on his spirit sea, the constant consumption of his soul power couldn't be ignored. He'd been using external forces to replenish his soul power all this time. If he didn't leave now, he'd run out of soul jades and run out of soul power. That would be bad. Speaking of which, although he'd used up a lot of soul jades and other resources to replenish his soul power, they'd also brought him some benefits. His soul had clearly become stronger. However, this wasn't what Lu Yi wanted. With the nourishment of the Rainbow Divine Lotus, his soul would continue to grow stronger even without these external forces. Lu Yi stood up and went back the way he'd come. He focused his vision and looked around. The late-stage Yu Yao of the Divine Wind Pirate Gang wouldn't give up on a World King flower so easily, right? This thing's value was immeasurable. So, she was probably still waiting for him outside? That had better be the case. Chapter 1682. Somewhere in the Yin-Yang Great Millstone, the white-haired old man of the Divine Wind Pirate Gang stared into the depths with a haggard face. His withered face was filled with anger and unwillingness. Half a year ago, when he had settled down in a low-level domain, he had inadvertently encountered a strange matter. He had clearly sensed that a constellation cultivator had also come to this low-level domain, but for some reason, that constellation cultivator had suddenly disappeared. After a careful investigation, he faintly felt that this low-level domain was likely hiding some secrets. In the Desolate Star domain, such a domain, even if it was the lowest level, was somewhat special, especially since it was located in the outer area of the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. He was considered an experienced and knowledgeable person. He had once heard about the flower race and the World King flower during an exchange with a certain Rizhao. As a result, he immediately came to some conclusions. Excited, he secretly left the low-level domain and gathered his men to kill his way back. He couldn't be sure whether there was a World King flower in that domain before he destroyed it, but there were some possibilities. It was just a low-level domain and a domain in the Desolate Star domain. If it was destroyed, then so be it. No one would find trouble with him because of this. In the end, there really was a World King flower hidden in that domain. And this treasure that should have belonged to him had somehow been taken away by a foreign advanced constellation cultivator. He was furious and ordered his subordinates to give chase, but the result was disastrous. Even he himself couldn't find anything until the advanced constellation cultivator fled into the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. He originally thought that no matter what strange escape methods that constellation cultivator had, he wouldn't be able to escape from his palm. Who would have thought that constellation cultivator had refined a alpha origin spirit flower and wouldn't be suppressed by the Yin-Yang Great Millstone's special environment? He had lost him. The old man felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. The value of a World King flower was immeasurable. As long as the news spread, large domains and even top domains would rush like ducks. With this flower, he would have endless wealth that he couldn't squander for several lifetimes. In the end, his painstaking planning had ended up benefiting someone else. He faintly knew that the World King flower couldn't be recovered. Since he had already lost track of Constellation Cultivator, he could forget about finding him again. Constellation Cultivator could escape in another direction. But how could he be willing to leave just like that? He still had a trace of unrealistic expectations. What if the kid got lost inside and ran out from this position? It was precisely because of this trace of hope that he hadn't left and had been waiting here anxiously, but a month of waiting had already made him restless. However, at this moment, a figure vaguely appeared in front of him. The old man's heart skipped a beat. He widened his bloodshot eyes and looked in that direction. Due to the omnipresent grinding force, the space within the yin-yang millstone was distorted, so the old man couldn't see who it was. However, as the other party got closer and closer, the figure became clearer and clearer. The old man's emotions slowly grew agitated. It's him. Was that brat? He actually walked out of that position. The old man almost threw his head back and laughed. He secretly made up his mind that this time, he couldn't let the other party escape no matter what. This was definitely the closest he had ever been to obtaining the World King flower. His magic power surged out, and invisible ripples spread out from his old body. In order to capture Lu Yi, the white-haired old man didn't hesitate at all. He immediately activated a secret technique, burning his own vitality as the price to forcibly increase his strength. In this position he was suppressed by the yin-yang millstone's environment. With his late-stage moonjade cultivation base, he could only display the strength of an early-stage moonjade cultivator. However, with the help of this secret technique, he could display strength infinitely close to that of a mid-stage moonjade cultivator. In an instant, the blood chi in the old man's body rippled, and his magic power surged. A string of pearl-like treasures appeared in the old man's hand. As his magic power surged, the old man shouted, "Go!" The pearls in his hand scattered, turning into 5 blazing suns. 4 of them sealed off the surrounding area, while the 5th shot straight towards Lu Yi. The scorching aura was so hot that even the space around it was distorted. In the distance, Lu Yi, who was slowly approaching, raised his eyebrows. A magic cultivator. As a weapon cultivator, he liked magic cultivators the most because they were very brittle. They weren't like those meat barbarians whose bodies were as hard as copper skin and iron bones. When the mountain plate saber slashed at them, he had to endure a powerful backlash. These 5 blazing suns were clearly the manifestation of one of his opponent's magic treasures. One had to admit, as expected of a late-stage moonjade cultivator. Even though she could only display the strength of an early-stage moonjade cultivator, her methods were still incomparable to those of a newly advanced moonjade. Judging from the might of this magic treasure, it was probably at least a 6-star treasure. As expected of the leader of a pirate gang. Her status was completely incomparable to that of old Tang's moonjade. If it had been before, the only thing Lu Yi could have done in the face of such an attack would have been to evade. However, a month ago, this attack was incomparably ferocious to him. Now, it seemed to be just that. He stared at the giant blazing suns attacking him and raised his hand to press down on the mountain plate saber. When the old man saw this, he couldn't help but be startled. Lu Yi had been running away ever since he came into contact with him. He didn't even have the courage to face him head-on. After all, the difference in strength between them was too great. But what was going on now? Had this brat lost his mind? Not only did he not run away in the face of his attack, he didn't even try to dodge. However, this undoubtedly delighted the old man even more. As long as he killed Lu Yi, the World King flower would reappear. At that time he would be able to easily collect it. The only thing that worried him was that the World King flower's appearance might attract Moonjade's attention. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the giant blazing suns had already swallowed Lu Ye's figure. The old man stared unblinkingly, as if he could already see the World King flower's appearance. He couldn't be any more excited. A late-stage star constellation cultivator couldn't possibly survive such an attack. However, the World King flower didn't appear. Only a faint flash of saber light could be seen. The old man couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He instinctively sensed that something was wrong. Although his cultivation was greatly suppressed, he still had Moon Jade's eyesight and battle experience. As a galactic pirate who plundered everywhere, he had experienced countless battles of various sizes in his life. Almost at the same time that the saber light appeared, the old man's body instinctively jumped back. However, he was still a step too late. A figure had appeared in front of him at some point in time. It was the enemy who should have been blasted to smithereens by the might of his transcendent artifact. This extremely young-looking brat was currently crouching slightly. His head was also slightly lowered. The hair in front of his forehead had turned into a shadow, blocking his gaze. However, the old man could feel the other party's cold eyes staring at him. He looked like a cheetah pouncing on its prey. The old man's eyes suddenly widened. Without thinking, he hurriedly circulated his transcendence energy to protect himself. At the same time, the crystal-like pendant hanging around his neck shattered, quickly turning into a light screen that enveloped him. The saber light flashed again. The old man was horrified. His body flew backward under the impact of a tremendous force. As his figure flew out, the light screen that was protecting him also burst like a bubble. The old man even felt that his protective mana had been cut open. It was only at this moment that he clearly sensed the energy fluctuations coming from Lu Ye's body. It was no longer Star Constellation's spiritual power, but Moon Jade's transcendence energy. Moon Jade. This brat had actually advanced to Moon Jade in the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. Although it was hard to believe, the truth was right in front of his eyes. Moreover, what was with such a terrifying slash? Even if Lu Yi had really advanced to Moon Jade, he shouldn't have possessed such shocking strength. The protective barrier formed by his transcendent artifact and his own transcendence energy should have been able to easily break through, let alone an early-stage Moon Jade. Even an intermediate-stage Moon Jade wouldn't have been able to do so. However, Lu Yi had only lightly slashed his saber. Even though they were both at the early-stage Moon Jade, the old man felt that Lu Yi had the ability to casually kill him. Was this the potential of a cultivator who had stood out in the battle for the Spirit Sea on the reincarnation tree and refined the Alpha Origin Spirit Light? He had long heard that such cultivators would all possess terrifying strength when they matured. However, he had never had the chance to see one. Did he finally get to see one? But this was not what he wanted. The old man's mind raced as he panicked. The 4 blazing suns that had originally sealed off the area swiftly moved under his control. They blasted towards Lu Ye's location at an incredible speed, instantly enveloping Lu Yi. Dazzling light soared into the sky as if the sun had really exploded. The surrounding space seemed to be on the verge of melting. What followed was the resounding hum of a saber. Saber light flashed within the 4 suns, seemingly slicing apart space itself. The suns were silently destroyed one after another, and a figure charged out from within, completely unharmed. In a single leap he was already not far from the old man. When Lu Yi was in the Constellation Mansion, using the vertical sweep technique had placed a huge burden on his body. Hence, he couldn't maintain this secret technique for too long. Now that he was in the Constellation Mansion and his physique had been greatly strengthened, Lu Yi finally felt that the burden on his body wasn't as great. With his current foundation he could easily maintain this technique for a day and a night. Of course, it was hard to say if he could maintain it for any longer. The old man's soul almost left his body. He never imagined that Lu Yi would still be able to escape unscathed. He was still retreating. Although he was fast, he couldn't outrun Lu Ye's Pan Shan saber. Lu Yi hadn't even used the Pan Shan saber, nor had he activated the Pan Shan saber's power. He had only relied on a simple swing. The saber was dyed red with blood and splattered in all directions. The old man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. A bone-deep wound had already appeared on his abdomen. As he spat out blood, the blood seemed to ignite, turning into a layer of blood-red light that enveloped his entire body. Then he fled into the distance without looking back. End of chapter. Chapter 1683. Undefeatable. This was the white-haired old man's most sincere feeling. Before today he would never have imagined that Yu Yao, who had just broken through, would possess such terrifying strength. Logically speaking, even if he was affected by the environment and his strength was greatly suppressed, he shouldn't have been so weak against Yu Yao, who had just broken through. However, in the previous exchange he had been suppressed. 3 of his treasures had been destroyed in an instant. One of them was an offensive treasure while the other 2 were defensive treasures. The offensive treasure was naturally the 5 Yang Pearl, which was a 6-star treasure. Although the broken pendant was only a 4-star treasure, it was a defensive treasure and had extremely powerful defensive abilities. Furthermore, the close-fitting robe he was wearing. It was a 5-star robe and it was incomparably tough. It also provided him with extraordinary defensive abilities. However, it had still been sliced open by his opponent's saber. If it weren't for the robe's protection, he would have been sliced in half by the saber. Blood flowed from the gaping wound on the old man's chest. The pain caused his chaotic thoughts to clear up slightly. He suddenly understood. No matter how strong Yu Yao's foundation was, she couldn't possibly beat him to the point where he couldn't even retaliate. It was the saber in his hand. That saber was simply too sharp. It could easily slice through a 4-star or 5-star defensive treasure. The quality of that saber was definitely ridiculously high. At the very least, it was a 7-star treasure. Just which realm did this brat come from? How could he be so wealthy? The destruction of 3 treasures undoubtedly had a great impact on a cultivator like him. However, he still had other treasures that he could use. As long as he didn't die, his battle prowess wouldn't be reduced too much. Right now, he only wanted to escape as quickly as possible. As long as he could fly a suitable distance away, he would be able to use Yu Yao's mid-stage strength. Then, he would naturally have the ability to fight his opponent. He couldn't give up on the World King Flower. A saber that was at least a 7-star magical treasure was also of great value. As long as he could kill that brat, he would be able to recoup all his losses. A beautiful future awaited him. On the other side, Lu Yi didn't immediately chase after the old man. Instead, he looked down at the mountain pan saber in his hand. This was because he suddenly discovered another characteristic of the mountain pan saber. It seemed to be especially destructive to defensive magical equipment. Although the 5 sun-like treasures were of high quality, they were offensive treasures, so they weren't particularly sturdy. With Yu Yao's early-stage power, it was naturally difficult for her to block his attacks. But logically speaking, even if it was a defensive magic treasure of a lower quality, under the same slash, it shouldn't have been so easy for him to break through. But in reality, the old man's 2 defensive treasures had been easily sliced apart by him. Of course, this had something to do with the quality of the old man's defensive treasures, but more importantly, it was due to the mountain pan blade's own characteristics. This was not just the benefit of sharpness. This was interesting. In a battle between cultivators, the most difficult thing to deal with was each other's defensive techniques. However, if the mountain plate saber had the ability to counter such techniques, then it would be much easier for him to deal with his enemies in the future. Without thinking too much about it, Zhang Xian raised his head and gazed ahead. In the blink of an eye, the old man who had activated blood escape was already thousands of miles away. In such an environment and with such speed, it was clear that the old man was not holding back at all. Lu Yi couldn't even make out the other party's figure in the distorted space. However, with a shake of his hand, the mountain plate saber hummed faintly. Tens of thousands of kilometers away, the fleeing old man suddenly cried out in alarm. In that instant he felt some mysterious power wriggling around the wound on his chest, tearing at his wound. In an instant, his injuries became more serious, and the intense pain caused him to stagger a little. Only now did he realize, to his horror, that his wound showed no signs of healing. This was clearly not normal. With his foundation as a late-stage moon jade, he should have been able to easily recover from such a wound. All he needed to do was consume some of his blood essence. However, he had been so focused on fleeing that he hadn't noticed this. Only now did he realize it. Not only had his wound not healed, but it had also worsened under the influence of that strange power. Even though he tried his best to suppress it, he could only slow it down slightly. What was this? The old man was overwhelmed with shock. Of course, he didn't know that this was a characteristic of the mountain plate saber. The strange power of Fang was like an invisible ant that clung to the wound. Not only could it impede the enemy's recovery, but Lu Yi could even use the mountain plate saber to control it and continue tearing at the wound inflicted by the mountain plate saber. In a situation where the difference in strength between the 2 parties wasn't too great, this kind of control was extremely fatal. The old man's already dire situation worsened. Although the old man didn't know what was going on, he knew that he had to get as far away from Lu Yi as possible. So, he pushed himself even harder. However, even though he was fast, Lu Yi was even faster. In just a few moments, the old man sensed the aura behind him closing in. His eyes were filled with malevolence. He couldn't understand how things had turned out this way. Everything had been planned so well. It was already extremely strange that a late-stage lunar constellation realm cultivator had ascended to Moon Jade in the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. Now he, a late-stage Moon Jade, was no match for the other party. This old man will fight you to the death. Sensing the difference in their speeds, the old man knew that he couldn't escape. With a resolute expression, he immediately turned to face Lu Yi, prepared to fight to the death. However, in the next instant his expression suddenly froze. Because what entered his eyes wasn't Lu Yi's figure, but a sea of blood-red light. The blood-red light suddenly expanded, transforming into a sea of blood. What's wrong with that young man? How can a weapon cultivator execute such an exquisite blood technique? The old man couldn't understand. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the vast sea of blood had already enveloped his body, enveloping a large area. Lu Yi activated the sea of blood just to be safe. He didn't know what other tricks the white-haired old man had up his sleeves. In the end, this was the first time he was facing a late-stage moon jade cultivator alone. Even if he already had an absolute advantage, what if the other party had some strange tricks up his sleeve? In a battle between cultivators, it was common for one to fail miserably at an easy task. Lu Yi didn't want such a thing to happen to him. With the sea of blood enveloping his surroundings, even if the other party really had some strange tricks up his sleeve, as long as he was careful enough, the other party could only close their eyes and wait for death. However, when he activated the sea of blood this time, Lu Yi could clearly sense that the power of the sea of blood was much greater than before. This change was undoubtedly brought about by the advancement of moon jade. Moreover, Lu Yi also had a feeling that if he infused his precious blood into the sea of blood's power would be substantially increased. This was something he hadn't noticed before. Ever since he condensed his own precious blood, he hadn't activated the sea of blood technique. Within the sea of blood, Lu Yi moved forward with his saber. Although the blood-red light filled his surroundings, Lu Yi could still clearly sense everything within the sea of blood. The white-haired old man who was wrapped in the sea of blood didn't have this ability. He was already severely injured, and now he was trapped in the sea of blood. He knew that he was powerless to reverse the situation. He couldn't help but roar at the sky, full of unwillingness. He didn't beg for mercy because he knew that it was useless. It was just like how he wouldn't let Lu Yi off if he had the upper hand. Winner takes all, loser takes all. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi activated the sea of blood technique hundreds of thousands of miles away, a figure who was sitting cross-legged and tempering his body suddenly opened his eyes. He glanced in Lu Ye's direction, a look of surprise on his face. After pondering for a moment, his figure flickered and flew towards Lu Yi. Judging from the magic power fluctuations coming from this figure, his cultivation was at the middle moon jade realm. But considering the suppressive effect of this position on a cultivator's strength, this person's true cultivation was clearly not just at the middle moon jade realm. He was absolutely at the late moon jade realm. The reason he wasn't suppressed to the early moon jade realm like the white-haired old man was clearly because his foundation was much deeper. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to this position to temper his body. Hundreds of thousands of miles were nothing to moon jade realm cultivators. A moment later he arrived at the battlefield. The closer he got, the more awe-inspiring his expression became. This was because he could feel an aura that made his heart palpitate. This aura was so strong that he hadn't even felt it when he was facing sunlight. Looking at the vast sea of blood in front of him and sensing the profound mysteries emanating from it, the figure couldn't help but gulp. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes and experienced it for himself, he would have found it hard to believe that such a thing could exist in this world. At this time within the sea of blood, Lu Yi had already killed the white-haired old man. The white-haired old man was trapped in the sea of blood and was being corroded by the power of Fang. He was also at the early moon jade realm, so how could he be a match for Lu Yi? Lu Yi was worried that the white-haired old man would use some kind of strange technique, but it didn't happen. The process of killing the white-haired old man was as simple as killing a little chick. After collecting the storage rings on the white-haired old man's hands, Lu Yi turned his head and looked in a certain direction. Through the sea of blood, he seemed to be able to see a figure not far away. A middle moon jade realm cultivator. No, a cultivator whose cultivation had been suppressed to the middle moon jade realm. He looked much stronger than the white-haired old man he had just killed. Was he attracted by the commotion here? That didn't make sense. At Moon Jade's level of cultivation, who wouldn't be aware that this matter didn't concern them? This world wasn't a place where one could casually watch a show. Who knew when one would lose their life just by watching a show? So why was the white-haired old man here? Lu Yi wasn't afraid of a cultivator whose cultivation had been suppressed to the middle moon jade realm. If the white-haired old man really wanted to cause trouble, he could use this opportunity to test his current strength. He immediately asked bluntly, "What are you looking at? If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyeballs out." Unexpectedly, the white-haired old man cupped his fists respectfully and transmitted his voice, "Blood Demon Continent's Ma Shangxi greets the Holy Sovereign." End of chapter. Chapter 1684. As soon as Ma Shangxi finished speaking, Lu Yi knew what was going on. This guy was a blood tribe cultivator. Even if other people noticed the commotion here, they probably wouldn't come over unless they were extremely curious. However, the blood tribe was different. Lu Yi had activated the blood sea technique here so the blood tribe cultivator could sense it. He probably thought Lu Yi was one of them and wanted to see if there was anything he could do to help. Although the two major races, the blood race and the insect race, were notorious in the starry sky, they were extremely united internally. Even if they did not come from the same domain, they would not be stingy when they met outside if they could help. This was very different from the human race. When human cultivators met outside, they would fight each other from time to time. Moreover, the blood tribe mainly cultivated their bodies, so it wasn't strange for them to come to the yin-yang great millstone to temper their bodies. When Lu Yi activated the blood sea technique, he didn't retract his holy nature. Ma Shangxi naturally sensed it, so he addressed him as the Holy Venerable. Even though they were both Yu Yao, there was a huge difference in status between those who had refined holy blood and those who hadn't. Only after entering the galaxy did Lu Yi realize how much of an advantage the blood tribe cultivators in the blood refinement realm had. This was because the strongest blood tribe cultivators there were only at the Divine Sea realm, but there were still many who had refined holy blood. However, in the galaxy, even if some blood tribe cultivators were already Yu Yao or even Rizhao, there were still many who hadn't refined holy blood. This was because holy blood was an extremely precious treasure to the entire blood tribe. This Ma Shangxi clearly hadn't refined holy blood. Lu Yi didn't expect to encounter a blood tribe cultivator here. He naturally didn't have any good feelings toward the blood tribe. If it had been the star constellation he wouldn't have thought much of it, but now that it was Yu Yao, he couldn't let this blood tribe cultivator go. He didn't expect to have the opportunity to kill a blood tribe cultivator after killing a late-stage Yu Yao galactic pirate. After advancing to Yu Yao, he had killed 2 blood tribe cultivators in one go. "Oh, I've suffered some injuries so I need some healing spirit pills," Lu Yi said solemnly. Ma Shangxi hurriedly said, "I have some here if the Holy Venerable doesn't mind, then send them in." Lu Yi interrupted him before he could finish his sentence. At the same time he activated the Holy Convergence technique to restrain his own holy nature, so as to prevent the other party from turning into a weakling. Seeing that Lu Yi actually cared about him so much, Ma Shangxi was clearly moved. Without any hesitation, he plunged into the sea of blood. The main reason was that Lu Ye's blood sea was too confusing. No one would have thought that a human could possess such a powerful holiness. Normally, only the blood race's Saint Venerables possessed such a powerful holiness. Ma Shangxi's first impression was the strongest, so she naturally thought Lu Yi was a member of the blood race. Sensing that Ma Shangxi had entered the blood sea, Lu Yi was about to unleash her divine nature again. This old man's strength had already been suppressed to Mid-Moon Jade Realm due to the special environment of the yin-yang millstone. If he were to be suppressed by his own holiness as well, it would be equivalent to carrying 2 mountains on his back. His strength would definitely not be much stronger than the old man from before, and he might even be weaker. Against such an enemy, Lu Yi would naturally be able to squash them as he pleased. However, just as he was about to do so, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and a strange feeling emerged in his heart. Lu Yi frowned and silently pondered. He was greatly surprised, because the strange feeling that suddenly appeared in his mind was actually the bloodline inheritance of the blood race. He hadn't noticed it before because he hadn't met the conditions to trigger it. Until Ma Shangxi walked into his blood sea, Lu Yi couldn't help but suppress the thought of using his divine nature to quickly kill him. He stared in Ma Shangxi's direction and fell into deep thought. This guy had only walked a short distance into the blood sea before standing still. Obviously he didn't dare to continue forward. He was afraid that an injured Saint Venerable would misunderstand him, so he took out the best healing spirit pills from his storage ring and said respectfully, "Saint Venerable, these are the spirit pills. Please take them." Lu Yi didn't take them. Instead he slowly said, "You are not bad." Ma Shangxi hurriedly said, "Saint Venerable is too kind, it was nothing. Are you willing to become my blood warrior?" Lu Yi asked again. Ma Shangxi was stunned. He couldn't believe his ears. After confirming that he hadn't heard wrong, he was overjoyed. "Saint Venerable is willing to accept me as a blood warrior?" He had never thought that he would encounter such a good thing just by coming here to check out the situation and deliver some spirit pills. Among the blood tribe, those who had refined Saint Blood had a high status not only because of their natural talent, but also because they could better comprehend the bloodline inheritance of the blood tribe after refining the Saint Blood. They didn't want to use their divine nature to suppress their own kind. Rather, it was a special characteristic of the Saint Blood itself. However, there were far too few ownerless Saint Blood in this galaxy. Normal blood tribe members didn't even have the opportunity to come into contact with Saint Blood. Even Yu Yao like Ma Shangxi was no exception. If a blood tribe member wanted to obtain divine nature, aside from refining ownerless saint blood, there was another way, and that was to become a blood warrior of a saint venerable. This way they would be able to obtain some saint blood from the saint venerable and obtain divine nature. Of course, this kind of divine nature was undoubtedly very weak, and couldn't compare to refining true saint blood. However, compared to those who didn't even have divine nature, their future was undoubtedly much better. Thus, for any blood tribe member, becoming a blood warrior of a saint venerable was a good thing. However, this kind of thing wasn't common, because blood tribe saint venerables weren't willing to share their saint blood. That would weaken their own bloodline, and it would also weaken their comprehension of the bloodline inheritance. Thus, even if some blood tribe saint venerables were willing to accept blood warriors, they would only do so after the sunshine. Moreover, they wouldn't accept too many. At most 2 or 3 would be enough. They wouldn't be willing to accept more. Of course, Lu Yi didn't have such concerns. He had refined an enormous amount of saint blood, and it wasn't something the blood tribe members could compare to. Not to mention 2 or 3, he could even accept 200 or 300 blood warriors. He also didn't place much importance on the bloodline inheritance of the blood tribe. In the past, he really didn't know that he could do such a thing. This should be an ability that he gained after refining his own saint blood. Unfortunately, he hadn't met any blood tribe members, so the information in his bloodline inheritance hadn't been activated until now. This was because if he wanted to subdue a blood tribe member as a blood warrior, he would need to use saint blood. Looking at it this way, saint blood had endless uses. Not only could it be turned into a saint blood clone, it could also greatly increase the power of the blood tribe's secret techniques, and it could even be used to subdue blood warriors. Moreover, Lu Yi didn't have to worry about the blood warriors rebelling after learning his true identity, because once they became his blood warrior, their life and death would be in his hands. This was a shackle that they couldn't escape for the rest of their lives. Lu Yi could even use that drop of saint blood to sense the psychological activities of the blood warriors, and he could completely strangle any danger in the cradle. Therefore, among the blood tribe, becoming a blood warrior of a saint venerable was something that some blood tribe members greatly desired. At the same time, some blood tribe members rejected it. After all, not all blood tribe members could accept letting others control their life and death. When Ma Shangxi was young, he was very resistant to becoming a blood warrior. Of course, he didn't meet any saint venerable who wanted to accept him as a blood warrior. However, as he grew older and his cultivation improved, many of his thoughts when he was young slowly changed. Especially after he trapped Yu Yao for many years and couldn't see the opportunity to break through to the sunshine, becoming a blood warrior would allow him to possess a saint attribute, which would undoubtedly allow him to break through his current shackles. Perhaps he would even be able to see the threshold of the sunshine. For this reason, he even personally visited the Sunshine Saint Venerable to ask for the position of a blood warrior, but he was mercilessly rejected. With no other choice, he could only run to the Yin-Yang Great Millstone, trying to use the pressure here to find the path to the sunshine. In the end, he naturally didn't gain anything. However, he didn't expect that an unintentional willow would turn out to be a shade. Right now, he actually met a Saint Venerable who wanted to accept him as a blood warrior. "If you don't want to, I won't force you." Lu Yi said this, but in his heart he was thinking that if Ma Shangxi dared to say the word no, he would beat Ma Shangxi into submission and then forcefully take him in. Since he knew that he could subdue a saint blood and had met a good candidate, he naturally wanted to give it a try. I'm willing. Please take pity on me, Saint Venerable." Ma Shangxi shouted repeatedly. This was too spineless. Lu Yi was somewhat dissatisfied with this guy's performance. He would rather see him die than surrender, but things had already come to this point and he had no other choice. Moreover, a late Yu Yao blood race cultivator could come in handy. With a thought, a drop of saint blood appeared on his fingertip. The saint blood was bright red, but as Lu Ye's power surged, the color of the saint blood gradually turned golden. It was filled with a divine aura. Lu Ye's divine aura was so strong that no blood race cultivator could compete with it. This was his first time taking in a blood warrior, so he didn't want to be too stingy. Moreover, the other party's strength was not bad, so he should have a good endurance. Therefore, the divine aura that Lu Yi condensed in the saint blood was equivalent to that of a normal drop of saint blood. In other words, Lu Ye's drop of saint blood was not much different from a real saint blood. He flicked his finger, and the golden drop of saint blood flew in front of Ma Shangxi. "Since that's the case, then refine it." Ma Shangxi's eyes widened. Looking at the drop of saint blood in front of him and feeling the rich divine aura in it, his mind was shaken. Even if he had never been a blood warrior and didn't know what it was like to be bestowed with saint blood, he was sure that the drop of saint blood in front of him was abnormal. Because the divine aura was too rich. He had once felt the divine aura from a saint venerable, and it was almost at this level. Was this a drop of real saint blood? Ma Shangxi was shocked by the thought in his mind. However, he soon determined that this was not real saint blood, but just a drop of saint blood. The divine aura of a drop of saint blood was almost at the level of a real saint blood. How terrifying was this saint venerable's background to be able to bestow such a drop of saint blood? Ma Shangxi felt that if he could successfully refine this drop of saint blood, then when he met that saint venerable again in the future, he would not be suppressed by him. End of chapter. Chapter 1685. To be able to casually bestow such a precious blood, the strength of this saint venerable was probably beyond imagination. To become the blood servant of such a powerhouse was an honor for the blood race. Ma Shangxi was excited and no longer hesitated. He even shed tears of gratitude. Thank you, Saint Venerable. Ma Shangxi stretched out his hand to grab the drop of precious blood. As soon as the precious blood puppet, which had a golden luster and was filled with a strong sense of holiness, entered his palm like flowing water, the next moment his expression changed abruptly, and a low roar came from his throat. His surging spiritual power and his qi and blood surged wildly. In fact, this place was not suitable for refining the sacred blood. After all, there was the suppression of the yin-yang great millstone. It was best to leave this place and find a secluded place outside. However, without Lu Ye's permission, how could Ma Shangxi dare to speak? With the sacred blood before him, he had to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Although his cultivation was suppressed by this special environment, Ma Shangxi still believed that he could refine this drop of precious blood. While he was refining the precious blood, Lu Yi had already retracted the sea of blood. He walked a distance away and sat down cross-legged. The process of refining the blood tribe's sacred blood was actually very dangerous. The slightest mistake could result in death. This had nothing to do with the strength of the blood tribe's cultivation. Regardless of whether it was the divine ocean or Yu Yao, the level of their cultivation did not make much difference to the refining process. Moreover, outsiders could not help in this process because it was related to his own bloodline. Thus Lu Yi could only wait. It would be best if Ma Shangxi could successfully refine this blood essence. A late Yu Yao blood warrior would be of some use to Lu Yi. Even if the refinement failed and Ma Shangxi died, Lu Yi wouldn't suffer much loss. He originally wanted to kill Ma Shangxi, but he accidentally discovered another use of the precious blood. Before he died, he decided to try to take in a blood servant. Ignoring Ma Shangxi, Lu Yi took out another soul jade and swallowed it. Normal cultivators needed to hold the soul jade in their hands and refine it with their divine sense, just like how they refine the soul refining grass. Lu Yi found it troublesome and decided to swallow it directly. In any case, he had the innate skill tree. He had eaten the blood crystals of the blood race and the monster cores of monster beasts. What was a little soul jade? Out of the 3 drops of treasure blood, only 2 were left. Since he knew that the treasure blood had endless uses, he naturally had to find time to condense more. When she was in the constellation, it was not easy for Lu Yi to condense precious blood. After several months, she only managed to condense 2 drops. Including the first drop, she only had 3 drops. However, now that he had Yu Yao, Lu Yi felt that it would be easier for him to refine precious blood. However, there was no rush. Lu Yi took out a few storage rings. They were all the spoils of war they had obtained recently. They belonged to the white-haired old man and Yu Yao of the Yen clan. 2 months in the Jade territory, and as a space pirate he must have some wealth. Lu Yi was a little poor now, so this kind of fortune was naturally worth looking forward to. It wasn't difficult for him to crack the restriction lock on the storage ring. In fact, it could even be said that he was very familiar with it. It did not take long for the restriction lock on one of the storage rings to be unlocked. Lu Yi rummaged through the storage rings and found that his harvest was not bad. There were not many spirit jades or spirit crystals. After all, even Yu Yao did not have much surplus on her. Most of the time, she used the cultivation resources she obtained to cultivate. However, there were some precious materials in the storage rings. He should be able to sell them for some spirit jades. As he cracked the rings one by one, his harvest gradually increased. One of the rings had a particularly large harvest. There were nearly 10 million spirit jades and hundreds of thousands of spirit crystals. In addition, there were many spirit pills that could be used to replenish soul power. Moreover, the quality of the pills was extremely good. Lu Yi guessed that the white-haired old man must have specially prepared these spirit pills. He obviously knew that once he collected the World King flower, it would be a heavy burden on his divine soul. Therefore he had specially prepared these spirit pills to replenish his soul power. In the end he obviously had no use for them. They all benefited Lu Yi. Lu Yi was in a good mood. Although he still had 300 spirit jades, there was no doubt that he would not be able to hold on for much longer. Now that he had replenished his spirit jades, he could hold on for much longer. While he was cracking the storage rings, he also separated a wisp of his consciousness to inform Hua Qianying and the two clan leaders of the current situation in the Flower Realm. When they learned that the white-haired old man had been dealt with by Lu Yi, they were both shocked and delighted. The greatest crisis had been resolved, but Hua Qianying's eyes were still filled with worry. This was because they would soon face another crisis. The placement of the World King Flower. Although the World King Flower had taken root in Lu Ye's spirit sea and there was nothing to worry about, this situation could not be maintained forever. Sooner or later Lu Yi would not be able to bear it. The World King Flower needed to find a target to attach itself to. Only then could it continue to exist. But how could it be so easy to find a suitable target in such a short time? Of course, a divine object like the World King Flower would be sought after like a flock of ducks in every realm. In the near future, outside the range of the Yin-Yang Great Millstone was the K-Void Galaxy, and the K-Void world was a large realm. How could they not desire the World King Flower? But human nature was complex. Before she could ensure that the other party would treat the creatures of the Flower Realm well, how could Hua Qianying casually entrust the World King Flower to someone? If the World King Flower attached itself to the other party and the creatures of the three clans in the Flower Realm were enslaved, that was not a situation she wanted to see. Moreover, a realm like the K-Void Realm was not the best choice for the World King Flower to attach itself to. Why don't we place the World King Flower in my homeland? Lu Yi sensed Hua Qianying's thoughts and suggested. This was an idea he had after learning about the World King Flower's wonders. Where's your homeland? Hua Qianying asked. In fact, she didn't reject the idea of placing the World King Flower in Lu Ye's homeland. After all, if it weren't for Lu Yi, the World King Flower would have fallen into the hands of the Divine Wind Pirate Gang. Moreover, Lu Yi was someone who was valued by the reincarnation tree. His character was trustworthy, and the key was that his future was immeasurable. In fact, she also had this idea in her heart, but she felt that a realm that could give birth to a cultivator like Lu Yi must have a strong foundation that was not inferior to the K-Void Realm. The K-Void Realm was not the best choice for the World King Flower to attach itself to, and Lu Ye's homeland was naturally not the best choice. The best choice for the World King Flower was a realm with a weak foundation. That way, after attaching itself to the realm, the World King Flower and the realm could complement each other. If it really attached itself to a realm with an extremely strong foundation, then the World King Flower might become the other party's vassal, which was not good for the World King Flower. My homeland it's very far away, but my homeland has only been promoted to a large realm for a few years, so its foundation isn't very strong. Lu Yi told the truth. What? Hua Qianying was stunned. Your homeland has only been promoted to a large realm for a few years? Lu Yi was also stunned. Why did this girl suddenly seem a little excited? Yes, if I count, it has only been promoted for a few decades, Lu Yi said truthfully. Hua Qianying's eyes lit up. A large realm that has only been promoted for a few decades. The Flower Realm inside the World King Flower was now considered a large realm, but because it had always been in this special environment, its foundation was not very strong. Compared to Lu Ye's homeland, it was probably about the same. In this case, wasn't it the best choice for the World King Flower to attach itself to? However, Hua Qianying soon remembered something. But your cultivation. Logically speaking, if Lu Ye's homeland had only been promoted to a large realm for a few decades, it should have been impossible for Yu Yao to be born. Lu Yi said, not long after I was promoted to a constellation, I came to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. During this time, I encountered many opportunities, so my cultivation improved relatively quickly. That's too fast. Hua Qianying was secretly speechless. However, when she thought about how this person was valued by the reincarnation tree, it seemed to be a matter of course. If you don't mind, my homeland will welcome the Flower Realm to attach itself to it. Although Lu Yi wanted the World King Flower to attach itself to the 9 states and thus help it grow, this still required Hua Qianying's approval. He was not a galactic pirate, and he would not force her to repay his kindness. However, he felt that if he forced this request, Hua Qianying would not refuse. Can you take me to see it? If your homeland has really been promoted to a large realm not long ago, then it is the best choice for the World King Flower to attach itself to. No problem. Lu Yi readily agreed. He did not mention that the 9 states was a rapidly growing realm. When Hua Qianying saw it later, she definitely would not be able to resist the temptation of the 9 states. The matter of the World King flower attaching itself to the 9 states was most likely settled. With the flower realm attaching itself to the 9 states, there would be the flower race, the wood spirits, and the spore race, as well as 2 Yuyao cultivators. The cultivators of the realm would undoubtedly be strengthened. Lu Yi was in a good mood, so he did not continue chatting with Hua Qianying. Instead, he looked at Ma Shangxi. There was a suppressed roar coming from the other side, and it sounded like he was having a hard time. At this moment, Lu Yi could not see what was going on with Ma Shangxi. He only knew that he was wrapped in a layer of golden light, and his aura fluctuated between strong and weak. Could this guy do it? Lu Yi knew that refining sacred blood was a huge test for the blood race, but this guy already had the foundation of a late-stage Yuyao cultivator, and he was even refining his own precious blood. Why was it so difficult? Logically speaking, if he could cultivate to the late-stage Yuyao cultivator, his aptitude should not be bad. Lu Yi did not care if Ma Shangxi failed and died. The key was that it was not easy for him to refine a drop of his own precious blood. Just as he was thinking about this, the golden light on the other side suddenly receded, gradually revealing Ma Shangxi's battered figure. From the outside, other than looking a little worse for wear, he did not change much. Even his strength did not increase at all. However, at this moment, Ma Shangxi's body was filled with a trace of saintly aura. Could this be considered a success? Under Lu Ye's gaze, Ma Shangxi's expression was undoubtedly very excited. He felt the saintly aura in his body, and he was both excited and emotional. This was because he realized that his initial feeling was right. After refining that drop of precious blood, he actually had the same saintly aura as the Sunshine Sage. As far as he knew, the Sunshine Sage was in existence who had refined a drop of sacred blood. Now that his saintly aura was the same as the Sunshine Sage's, didn't that mean that the drop of precious blood he refined was equivalent to a drop of sacred blood? End of chapter. Chapter 1686. A drop of condensed precious blood was almost equivalent to a drop of sacred blood. What kind of powerhouse would be able to casually bestow such precious blood? Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Ma Shangxi quickly flew over to Lu Ye's side with respect. The refinement of the precious blood was actually not complete, but he had already passed the most dangerous stage. The next step was to grind his way through. Once he was able to completely refine that drop of precious blood, his own bloodline would experience a qualitative leap. He followed Lu Ye's aura and rushed over. He stopped not far away and respectfully said, "Greetings, holy sage. This lowly one did not disappoint and has refined the precious blood." At the same time he looked up and quietly sized up Lu Yi. Previously, due to the interference of the blood sea, he did not see Lu Ye's appearance at all. He did not even know Lu Ye's cultivation level. Until now, based on his perception, this powerful holy sage's cultivation level was not at all the powerful sunshine he had imagined. He was actually only at the early stage of Yuyao. Even if he considered the suppression of this position, he was only at the middle stage. At most, he was at the late stage. His cultivation level was actually lower than his own. Even so, Ma Shangxi did not dare to underestimate the other party. A drop of precious blood casually bestowed by the holy sage had allowed him to be reborn. His future achievements would definitely be limitless. Of course, he was not stupid enough to look down on the other party based on his current cultivation level. He looked at the holy sage's appearance again. He was very young and had the appearance of a human. This was not strange. In order to move freely in the universe, the blood race had long since developed a secret technique to change their appearance. After all, it was not a good experience to walk around ostentatiously with the characteristics of a blood race. In this regard, the insect race could not. As one of the 2 scourges of the universe, the characteristics of the insect race could not be concealed no matter what. However, what puzzled Ma Shangxi was, why did the holy sage's appearance look so familiar to him? He vaguely felt like he had seen him somewhere before. Yuyao's memory was naturally very strong, so he only needed to think for a moment to remember where he had seen this face before. It was an image. Yuyao, who had once led her clansmen to participate in the battle for the deity sea of the reincarnation tree, had brought back an image. The environment of the image was inside the reincarnation tree. The powerhouses of various large realms had gathered. The young figure in the center of the image had the appearance of this young man. According to this image, the insect race and the blood race had joined forces to issue a bounty. Yes, Wuxia of the 9 heavens. Ma Shangxi immediately thought of this name. However, he quickly got rid of that thought in horror. How could such a powerful Saint Venerable have anything to do with that human boy? The Lord must have used the boy's appearance to do something. That's right, that must be it. That's right, that's it. I'm the person you're thinking of. Opposite him, Lu Yi looked at Ma Shangxi with interest. Lu Yi had refined the precious blood. Although he hadn't completely refined it and had only survived the most dangerous period, Lu Yi could already control everything about him. Even the fluctuations in his heart were all under Lu Ye's scrutiny. Ma Shangxi was obviously stunned for a moment, and then looked at Lu Yi innocently. My lord, I don't understand. He really did not understand what the Lord meant. What do you mean I'm the person you think I am? No matter how he thought about it, these words didn't sound right. I am Lu Yi of the 9 heavens, the human that you blood tribe and the insectoids have put out a bounty on. Ma Shangxi was quiet for a moment and then laughed embarrassedly. Holy Master, please don't joke with me. How could such a thing be possible? Lu Yi looked at this late-stage moon jade in front of him with some regret. He always felt that this guy was not very smart. Lu Yi didn't say anything more to him. Believe it or not, this guy had already become his blood servant and couldn't do anything. He couldn't accept the reality now, but he would have to accept it sooner or later. Let's go, Lu Yi said. Ma Shangxi quickly summoned his star boat. Holy Master, please? Lu Yi nodded and got on the star boat. Ma Shangxi then asked, Holy Master, please tell me where we should go next. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, Before coming in, I saw a market outside. Let's go there and take a look. He originally planned to go there to buy some things that could restore his soul power, but since he had obtained the white-haired old man's inheritance, he didn't need to. Next, he would go back to the 9 states and settle down the World King Flower. If it was in the past, he wouldn't have been able to do so. After all, it would take too long to travel to and from the 9 states. Unless he had a large number of soul jades or spirit pills to restore his soul power, he wouldn't be able to last for such a long time. But now he was half a soul race. With the help of the soul race's starry sky pool, there was hope that he could find a convenient path to the 9 states. Lu Yi still remembered Little Nine's reluctance when he left the 9 states last time. He also remembered that he had promised Little Nine that he would bring back delicious food for it when he returned. Little Nine was like a child, and it was a child that only Lu Yi knew. Once Lu Yi left, even though the entire 9 provinces was big, it had no one to communicate with. The only thing it could do was to silently protect the 9 provinces, and then anxiously wait for Lu Ye's return. When an adult went out and had fun, he would naturally bring back some gifts for the child that stayed behind, especially since he had already promised. For a realm, delicious food was undoubtedly something that could improve the foundation of the realm. For example, the miraculous items in the Thousand Hills tomb were extremely beneficial to a realm. However, Lu Yi didn't have the ability to do anything there. He had only succeeded last time because of the blue bird. He would have to think of another way. Lu Yi estimated that he would have to cultivate to the level of sunshine before he could go to the Thousand Hills tomb. Moreover, he would have to discuss this matter with the blue bird. Another example would be going to the market outside to see if there was anything like the crystal core of the World Eater beast. This could also be used as a snack for Little Nine. Ma Shangxi received the order and drove the star boat out. Its speed was extremely fast and stable. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. It was so convenient to have subordinates. He didn't even need to worry about traveling himself. He only needed to give orders. Moreover, Ma Shangxi's efficiency as a late-stage Yu Yao was undoubtedly much faster than his own. In terms of foundation, Ma Shangxi was much stronger than the white-haired old man of the Divine Wind Pirate Gang. This could be seen from the suppression of the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. At a certain depth, the white-haired old man's cultivation was suppressed to the early-stage Yu Yao, but Ma Shangxi could still unleash the power of a mid-stage Yu Yao. This showed that the white-haired old man's foundation was insufficient. His cultivation was probably all accumulated through external forces. A few days later they left the range of the Yin-Yang Great Millstone. After passing through the invisible barrier, they entered the starry sky. The market wasn't far away. Lu Yi had glanced at it from afar when he was escaping. Ma Shangxi tactfully used a secret technique to hide his blood race characteristics and transformed into a human. Although his figure was still tall, he undoubtedly looked much more handsome. Moreover, he didn't look very old, at most 30 years old. After leaving the Yin-Yang Great Millstone, Ma Shangxi's cultivation recovered to the late-stage Yu Yao. Lu Yi also felt that he wasn't any weaker than the mermaid Great Elder Yen Miao. This guy was actually a peak Yu Yao. Now that he had obtained his precious blood, if he worked hard enough in the future and had some opportunities, he might be able to break through to sunshine. This blood warrior he had casually accepted was really good. His future was promising. Lu Yi was very satisfied with Ma Shangxi, but Ma Shangxi was confused at this moment. At first he thought that Lu Yi was a mid-stage Yu Yao. He didn't expect that after leaving the Yin-Yang Great Millstone and without the suppression of the ancient environment, Lu Yi was still at the early stage Yu Yao. What was going on? However, he was still a late-stage Yu Yao after all. His knowledge and experience were extraordinary. He naturally figured out what the white-haired old man had thought of. He couldn't help but feel excited. If he wasn't mistaken, the Holy Master who had given him his precious blood had definitely won the battle for the reincarnation tree and refined the Alpha Origin Spirit Light. Otherwise, there was no way he wouldn't have been suppressed by the ancient environment. It was nothing new for the blood race to win in the Alpha Origin stage. In the past, whether it was the blood race or the insect race, there would always be some winners in the battle for the Divine Sea. This was because the blood race could rely on secret techniques to find their own kind and then join forces with them. Only the last battle for the Divine Sea had been completely wiped out by Lu Yi of the Nine Heavens. Thinking of Lu Yi of the Nine Heavens and the Holy Master's words, Ma Shangxi felt a little uneasy. He hadn't understood what the Holy Master meant these days. But he didn't dare to ask too much. The market was still quite lively. Many cultivators who came to the Yin-Yang Great Millstone to temper themselves would use this place as a temporary shelter to replenish their energy. There weren't many constellation mansions here. Most of them were Yu Yao. Not every constellation realm cultivator dared to enter deep into space wonders to temper their physique like Lu Yi. Generally speaking, constellation realm cultivators' range of activity was limited to the solar system where their own domain was located. Very few of them would leave their own solar system. Of course, a special environment like the Wanxiang Sea was an exception. There were too many opportunities in that place. As long as the conditions were right, constellation mansions were more than willing to go there. Therefore, even if some cultivators had ulterior motives, they would wait until their Yu Yao ascended to the Wanxiang Sea. This was because it was safer that way. Lu Yi glanced at the various stalls. It wasn't that there wasn't anything good. The Yu Yao's products were naturally not bad. However, Lu Yi didn't need much. As a weapon cultivator, the mountain pan saber was enough for him. There were also spirit jades and spirit crystals for cultivation. As for spirit pills and medicines, he didn't need them for the time being. The entire Wanxiang Sea was his spirit pills and medicines. Seeing that Lu Yi didn't seem to find anything he liked, Ma Shangxi asked, "Holy Master, what do you want to buy? Why don't you let me help you look out for something?" Lu Yi nodded and said, "Something like the crystal core of the Realm Eater. It can improve the foundation of a domain." Ma Shangxi understood. "Then, Holy Master, I'll walk around this area. If there's anything, I'll buy it." "Go ahead." Lu Yi nodded. Speaking of which, Ma Shangxi was also a late-stage Yu Yao cultivator. He should be quite wealthy. Should he ask him to hand over his wealth? After thinking about it, Lu Yi decided to forget about it. It wouldn't be too late to ask him about it in the future when he was tight on money. End of chapter. Chapter 1687. After splitting up with Ma Shangxi, Lu Yi wandered around for half a day without any results. Suddenly, he saw a few figures gathered in front of a stall. The stall owner was a dignified woman. Lu Yi didn't know what she was selling, but she had actually attracted so many people. Lu Yi walked over to join in the fun. As he approached, he glanced at the items on the stall. After listening for a while, he finally understood what kind of good stuff was being sold here. A white moon crystal. Fundamentally speaking, a white moon crystal was a star beast's essence core. However, it was different from ordinary essence cores. Although 99% of star beast essence cores had many uses, they couldn't be directly refined and absorbed by cultivators. In the entire universe, only a few types of star beast essence cores could be refined by cultivators. These star beast essence cores were extremely beneficial to cultivators. The white moon crystal was one of these types of star beast essence cores. The benefits it could bring were something that almost all Yu Yao scrambled for. This was because it was a treasure that could improve the quality of one's essence core. The quality of one's essence core was directly related to the efficiency of a Yu Yao's cultivation. Generally speaking, when a Yu Yao first formed, the quality of their essence cores wouldn't be too high. Basically, they wouldn't be able to satisfy the Yu Yao's cultivation requirements. Thus, Yu Yao would have to think of ways to improve the quality of their essence cores until they met the requirements. Although there weren't as many Yu Yao in the universe as there were star mansions, there were still quite a few of them. Everyone needed treasures, so the rarer an item was, the more valuable it was. This piece of white moon crystal was about the size of a fist. As soon as the stall owner displayed it, many Yuyao immediately came forward to inquire about its price. However, after learning about the price, most of them left. Only a small number of them continued to haggle with the stall owner. However, the woman clearly had no intention of relenting. She insisted on the price, causing the Yuyao who had their eyes on this white moon crystal to feel helpless. Some of them even revealed vicious expressions. Clearly, they wanted to wait for this woman to leave the market and secretly attack her. Lu Yi was naturally very interested in this white lunar crystal. He had never seen this thing before, mainly because he had no use for it. Now that he had Yuyao, his needs were even greater than Yuyao's. He still didn't know what tier his spiritual source had to reach in order to satisfy his cultivation needs. This price was indeed a little expensive. A whole 20 million spirit jades, which was comparable to the price of an 8-star transcendent treasure. However, in the end, magic treasures were external forces, while the source of one's art was one's own foundation. Thus, it was not suitable for such a comparison. However, 20 million spirit jades was indeed a lot. Even Yu Yao usually didn't have that much wealth. After all, Yu Yao's cultivation expenditure was much greater than Xingxiu's. Thus, even though it was easier for them to obtain cultivation resources, they actually didn't have much left. For example, the white-haired old man from the Divine Wind sect, as a leader of space pirates who robbed people everywhere, only had a net worth of about 10 million spiritual jades. Lu Yi could gather all the spirit jades and spirit crystals he had on him, but if he did that, he would really become a pauper. As the saying goes, as long as you have food in your hand, you won't panic. If a cultivator didn't have spare spirit jades and spirit crystals, they wouldn't be able to find them in case of an emergency. When the cultivators who were bargaining with the woman stall owner saw that they were unable to gain any advantage, they could only give up and gradually disperse. Lu Yi stayed behind alone. The woman glanced at him and said expressionlessly, 20 million spirit jades, no bargaining. If it weren't for the fact that she urgently needed spirit jades, she wouldn't have taken out such a treasure to sell. She had obtained it by chance and was planning to keep it for her own use. I didn't bargain. Lu Yi replied and continued to wait. After a while, Ma Shangxi walked over in high spirits and said excitedly, Holy Sage, do you think this thing will work? He had just pledged his allegiance to Lu Yi and received Lu Ye's precious blood, so his future was bright. Ma Shangxi was eager to perform meritorious deeds and was quite lucky. He really did find a good thing on the other side of this market and immediately bought it. He handed over a storage ring. Lu Yi took it and probed it with his divine sense. He found that it was a black, rock-like object the size of several water tanks. What is this? Lu Yi asked. Ma Shangxi said, reporting to Holy Sage, when some realms shatter, they will leave behind some remains. Of course, most of these remains are worthless, but there are a small number of them that still contain the foundation of that realm. This thing is the remains of a shattered realm. Although its quality doesn't seem to be very good, it has the same effect as the Realm Eater's crystal core. Lu Yi had asked him to find something similar to the Realm Eater's crystal core, something that could improve the foundation of a realm. However, Realm Eater's crystal core was extremely rare, so it wasn't easy to find one. In fact, this kind of realm's remains were more common. Lu Yi nodded slightly and said, not bad. He then put the ring away. Ma Shangxi was overjoyed to be praised. He was a discerning person, so when he saw Lu Yi standing in front of such a stall, he asked enthusiastically, Holy Sage, what good thing have you taken a fancy to? Lu Yi didn't speak, but the woman stall owner opened her mouth and said in a cold tone, one white moon crystal, do you want to buy it? When Ma Shangxi heard this, he immediately understood. The Holy Sage's cultivation was at the early stage of Yu Yao, so she obviously wanted to improve the quality of her art source if she wanted to buy this white moon crystal. Immediately he cautiously asked for the price. Then, his face darkened and he shouted angrily, something like the white moon crystal only sells for around 15 million in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. How come it's 20 million here? Lu Yi couldn't help but glance at Ma Shangxi. He didn't expect this guy to be so familiar with the prices in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. It was obvious that he had been to the 10,000 Elephant Sea before. The woman didn't quarrel with him and only said indifferently, if you think the 10,000 Elephant Sea is cheap, you can buy it there. Ma Shangxi didn't know what to say. He gave Lu Yi a look and said, Holy Sage, there's no need to waste your money. Let's go. Lu Yi nodded. Although he was interested in the white moon crystal, he wasn't interested in it if he was going to be taken advantage of. After all, the difference of 5 million spirit jades wasn't small. It was no wonder that Yu Yao didn't have any intention of buying it even though she was tempted. He stayed here because he wanted to wait for Ma Shangxi to come and buy it for him. After all, the spirit jades of his blood warrior were equal to his own. However, now that he knew the true price of the white moon crystal, there was no need for him to buy it. It wouldn't be too late to buy it when he returned to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. After walking for a while, Ma Shangxi suddenly handed over a storage ring. "Holy Sage, this humble servant has no use for this thing for the time being. I hope Holy Sage doesn't mind." Li took a look and found that it was actually a piece of white moon crystal. Moreover, it seemed to be even bigger than the one the woman had sold him. Seeing him look at him, Ma Shangxi explained, "This humble servant was planning to use it after breaking through to the Sunshine Realm, but right now, this humble servant is still far from that realm. It could even be said that before meeting Lu Yi, he didn't have a chance to break through to the Sunshine Realm. Although he had a chance now, it wasn't something that could be done overnight." Lu Yi was interested in the white moon crystal, but he didn't want to waste his money. The main reason was that he couldn't afford it. Now that he had one, he could take it out and show it to the Holy Sage. "You're not bad." Lu Yi patted him on the shoulder. He had made a big profit by taking in this blood warrior. It was just a drop of treasure blood, so he could condense another one. As for the loss of Saint attribute, it was nothing compared to what he already had. Now, not only did he have a peak Yu Yao as his subordinate, but he also obtained a piece of white moon crystal worth 10 to 20 million spirit stones. In addition, the domain fragment wouldn't be cheap. It would cost at least a few 100,000 spirit jades. Lu Yi couldn't help but want to ask Ma Shangxi to lead the way and find a few more blood race Yu Yaos to subdue. Since this guy was a peak Yu Yao, he definitely knew other blood race Yu Yaos. Those were all valuable resources. However, in comparison, returning to the 9 states to settle down the World King Flower was undoubtedly more important. There would be plenty of opportunities to subdue blood race Yu Yaos in the future. "It's this humble servant's duty to share Holy Sage's burdens," Ma Shangxi said sincerely. Compared to these external things, Lu Yi gave him hope of breaking through to the Sunshine Realm. This was the real motivation for Ma Shangxi to sacrifice his life for him. Moreover, after being accepted as a blood warrior by Lu Yi, he would never be able to get rid of it for the rest of his life. Naturally, he had to perform well. After a short while, master and servant drove the star boat out of the market. Under the guidance of the star chart Lu Yi had given them, they headed toward the Cave Void Galaxy. Ma Shangxi drove the star boat. Since Lu Yi had nothing to do, he prepared to condense a few more drops of treasure blood. Treasure blood had many uses. Naturally, the more the better. However, with Lu Ye's late star constellation realm foundation, it was difficult for him to condense more after condensing 3 drops. Now that he had become a Yu Yao, the situation should improve. However, before that, he thought of something. He immediately placed the mountain saber across his lap and immersed his consciousness into it. He had been stuck at Wang Xiu's level for a long time. It wasn't that he couldn't comprehend it completely. In fact, he had already made great progress. Compared to when he was killed by Wang Xiu, as soon as he saw him, he could already vaguely see some results. Although he was still killed by a single strike, it was already different from before. It was just that he had been running around recently, so he didn't have time to comprehend it. Now that he had become a Yu Yao, he wondered if the situation would improve. As he immersed his consciousness, he arrived at the familiar green hall. Wang Xiu was in front of him. As usual, he was in an attacking posture. His body was slightly bent as he stood not far away. His left hand gripped the scabbard and his right hand gripped the hilt. A powerful aura flowed from his body. Early Yu Yao. The strength of the projections of the Fang Blade ancestors in the Cyan Hall was closely related to Lu Ye's cultivation base. Based on Lu Ye's cultivation base, the projections of these ancestors could show the same cultivation base as Lu Yi. When he entered at the Late Star Constellation Realm, Wang Xiu was at the Late Star Constellation Realm. Now that he entered at the Early Yu Yao Realm, Wang Xiu was at the Early Yu Yao Realm. It wouldn't decrease because of Lu Ye's cultivation. This was because the energy that these projections were using came from Lu Ye's Mountain Pan Saber. Compared to when he was at the Late Star Constellation Realm, Wang Xiu's aura was undoubtedly many times stronger. Lu Yi once again felt like he was being targeted by his natural enemy. His heart palpitated uneasily as if he would die in the next moment. In fact, he had already experienced this many times. End of chapter. Chapter 1688. This time there seemed to be something different. Lu Yi activated the clear vision spirit tattoo to enhance his eyes, allowing him to see Wang Xiu's aura. Suddenly the feeling of impending death reached its peak. Wang Xiu seemed to move, and in the next moment, saber light filled Lu Ye's eyes. Lu Ye's mountain plate saber met the attack head-on. With a loud bang, violent magic power collided and dispersed in the hall. Lu Yi only felt an incomparably huge force coming head-on, causing him to involuntarily retreat. However, his eyes were incomparably bright. In the past he would have been killed by this attack, but now he was still in the hall. This undoubtedly meant that he had blocked this attack. He had blocked it, but not completely. This was because Wang Xiu's incomparably violent saber light had sliced through Lu Ye's shoulder. Although this was only a mental projection, it was no different from Lu Ye's main body. The only difference was that if he died here, his life wouldn't be in danger. He would only lose a bit of his divine sense. Given the strength of his physique, Wang Xiu's saber was able to slice through him. One could only imagine how terrifying this attack was. Half of Lu Ye's shoulder had been chopped off, but he didn't care. He gripped his saber with his other hand and fiercely swung it downwards. The faint roar of a beast could be heard as an invisible beast opened its mouth, baring its fangs as it violently swung its saber at Wang Xiu. Baring its fangs. As Wang Xiu was forced back, Lu Yi ferociously pounced, his aura becoming tyrannical and violent. In the blink of an eye, the figure in the hall flickered and saber light flashed. Wang Xiu was very strong. None of the ancestors who could leave behind their inheritances in the Ho were ordinary powerhouses. No matter what era they were in, they could be considered invincible in the same realm. However, his strongest move was the saber draw. If Wang Xiu in his normal state was on the same level as Qing Li Yanxi and Qing Chang, then Wang Xiu after using the sword draw would be half a level higher. Since Lu Yi had blocked this strongest attack, the rest was simple. In this era, Lu Yi was also invincible in the same realm. After a short while, Lu Yi, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, suddenly stopped because Wang Xiu's figure had suddenly left the battlefield and nodded slightly at him. Lu Yi was overjoyed to see this. Did this count as passing the test? However, he soon had some doubts because according to his past experience, he should have comprehended the inheritance left behind by the other party when he passed the test. Qing Li's bearing fangs, Yanxi's leaping technique, and Qing Fu's dual blade stream were all comprehended through countless deaths and confrontations. But in the fight with Wang Xiu, Lu Yi hadn't actually sensed his legacy. Furthermore, according to his deduction, the inheritance that Wang Xiu had left behind should be the sword drawing slash. How could he comprehend it in such a confrontation? What was going on? Just as Lu Yi was feeling puzzled, Wang Xiu sat down cross-legged and placed his scabbard across his knees. Next, his magic power surged. Lu Yi quietly observed, and in the next moment, a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. He had always wondered why Wang Xiu's saber strike was so powerful. Only now did he understand. The reason why it was strong was because it had accumulated enough power for a long time. The sword drawing slash was only for a moment, but before the sword drawing slash, there was a very long time to accumulate power. In the cultivation world, secret arts that required accumulation of power were not weak. For example, the Fire Phoenix spiritual tattoo that Lu Yi had displayed previously took a long time to accumulate power. However, in the same realm, once he successfully activated it, he could kill a large number of enemies. A long time to accumulate power meant that there was enough power poured in, so the power was naturally not small. At this moment, on Wang Xiu's scabbard, a series of complicated patterns began to appear. Even with Lu Ye's attainments in the Tao of spiritual tattoo, he could feel the complexity of this spiritual tattoo. Such a spiritual tattoo was not something that an ordinary spiritual tattoo master could construct. Wang Xiu was an extremely outstanding spiritual tattoo master. The incomparably powerful mystery of his sword drawing slash was on this spiritual tattoo. As for the key points, Lu Yi had to slowly explore it himself. In the Cyan Hall, Lu Yi calmly observed, carefully memorizing the connections and changes of each basic element. For ordinary weapon cultivators, even if they forcefully memorized it, this inheritance was not so easy to obtain. However, Lu Yi was different. He was a spiritual tattoo master himself, and he also had the talent tree. Therefore, he felt that it would not be difficult for him to obtain Wang Xiu's inheritance. Time passed, and Lu Yi stayed in the Green Hall for a longer period of time than he had in the past. It was not until a few days later that his mind returned to normal. Fortunately, he had subdued Ma Shangxi as a blood warrior. With such a Piqu Yao beside him to protect him, Lu Yi could focus on nothing else. Otherwise he would never dare to travel in the starry sky. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he tried was to inscribe the spiritual tattoo into the talent tree. As long as he could inscribe the spiritual tattoo into the talent tree, he would be able to activate it as he wished in the future. This was not difficult for him. He just needed to spend some time and energy. There were many spiritual tattoos on the talent tree that he had inscribed himself. The blank leaves burning on the talent tree were all carriers for inscribing spiritual tattoos. Recalling what he saw in the Cyan Hall, Lu Yi meticulously started inscribing spiritual tattoos. The spiritual tattoo Wang Xiu displayed was much more complicated than the one in the void. There were close to 10,000 yin and yang elements. This was not something a leaf could bear. Lu Yi spent a few days slowly inscribing the spiritual tattoo. Looking at it, the talent tree seemed to have an additional fierce aura. The leaf area that bore the mysterious spiritual tattoo seemed to be hiding a peerless weapon that could be slashed down at any time. Now that the spiritual tattoo was successfully inscribed, the next step was to test it. Lu Yi was looking forward to it. He recovered a little and imitated Wang Xiu. He placed the mountain pan saber and its scabbard on his knees. Then he activated his magic power and inscribed the spiritual tattoo on the scabbard. At that time, Wang Xiu inscribed the spiritual tattoo very slowly. It was mainly the inheritance. When he left the inheritance, he was afraid that the later generation would not understand it, so he taught it step by step. Now that Lu Yi had learned this spiritual tattoo, there was no need for him to be so slow. Although it was a spiritual tattoo constructed with 10,000 foundational elements, it was completed in an instant. Then he activated his magic power and poured it into the spiritual tattoo. This was the process of accumulating power for the saber draw. The longer it took to accumulate power, the more terrifying the saber draw's power would be. When he injected his magic power into the spirit rune, it began to flow within the spirit rune like a cultivator. This situation gave Lu Yi the feeling that the spirit rune had really become a non-living cultivator. The magic power he injected into it began to circulate in the spirit rune's body. After one circulation, there were some slight changes in the scabbard. Lu Yi felt that if he wanted to, he could transfer the spiritual tattoo from the scabbard to the mountain pan saber at any time. This would increase the power of the saber. This was the secret of the saber draw. However, his magic power had only completed one circulation in the spiritual tattoo, so the increase in power was almost negligible. Lu Yi continued to activate his magic power. However, he soon realized another problem. The quality of the mountain pan saber's scabbard was too low. It could not withstand the accumulation of power. The mountain pan saber's quality was not easy to determine. It had been transformed from the mountain pan saber after the mountain pan saber was swallowed by the mountain pan saber. However, the scabbard was still the same. It was only a spirit treasure, and it was not a very high-quality one. Lu Yi had never thought of changing the scabbard or increasing its quality. After all, it was just a container and basically had no use for it. However, now that he wanted the scabbard to be the carrier of the spiritual tattoo, its quality was undoubtedly too low. After a few circulations, the scabbard felt as if it could not withstand it anymore. If this continued, it would definitely shatter. This made Lu Yi frown. It seemed that he had to find a way to change to a better scabbard in the future. At the very least, it had to be able to withstand the continuous accumulation of power from the spiritual tattoo. Lu Yi stopped what he was doing and thought about it. The reason he had constructed the spiritual tattoo on the scabbard was that he had no other choice. He was also the owner of the mountain pan saber. It was impossible for him to find a blacksmith to construct the spiritual tattoo in the mountain pan saber. There was probably no blacksmith in the world who had such ability. Therefore, he could only settle for the next best thing, which was to construct the spiritual tattoo in the scabbard. Although the spiritual tattoo was something Wang Xiu had researched, he probably did not have the ability to maintain the existence of the spiritual tattoo all the time. Therefore, he could only construct a restriction with the spiritual tattoo as the main body in the scabbard. This way, he could satisfy his requirement of accumulating power at any time. Because it was a completed restriction, he only needed to inject magic power into it. He did not need to deliberately maintain the existence of the spiritual tattoo. However, this was not a problem for Lu Yi. With the convenience of the talent tree, he could control the spiritual tattoo no matter how complicated it was. Therefore, perhaps he did not need the scabbard for the time being. He could try it in the mountain pan saber. The scabbard could not withstand the accumulation of power, but the mountain pan saber could. Thinking of this, Lu Yi's train of thought became clear. He then constructed the spiritual tattoo in the mountain pan saber. Everything went smoothly. The mysterious spiritual tattoo was maintained in the mountain pan saber. His magic power circulated again and again, slowly accumulating power. In a short period of time, the effect of accumulating power would not be too great. However, as time passed, it would naturally become stronger. The only problem was that he had to constantly divert a bit of his attention to maintain the existence of the spiritual tattoo. He also had to inject magic power into it continuously. However, for a cultivator who pursued strength, if he could obtain an opportunity to explode, it was all worth it. Lu Ye's strength was already unmatched in the same realm. Although he had not truly fought against Yu Yao, who was at her peak, Lu Yi felt that it would not be too difficult for him to fight against her. His strength was already at this level. If he could suddenly explode with power far beyond his own, perhaps he would have the qualifications to threaten Rizhao. The 2 red talismans that Su Yuqing had given him had already been used. The treasure money was also with Wuxia. Right now he was really lacking a trump card. Ma Shangxi was indeed loyal. However, he could not rely on others for his own safety. Compared to someone else's protection, Lu Yi would rather have the ability to face danger himself. End of chapter. Chapter 1689. In the end, the red talisman and the treasure coin were only external sources of power. Lu Yi actually preferred the latter. He continued to maintain the spirit inscriptions on the Pan Shan saber and circulated his magic power. Every time he completed a cycle, the accumulated power would increase slightly. This feeling of gradual improvement was very comfortable. As for the strand of consciousness he had to divert, it was not a burden to Lu Yi at all. Back when he was in the True Lake realm, he had already used the talent tree to create a doppelganger. At his current level of cultivation, multitasking was a basic skill for every cultivator. Holy Sovereign, we're almost there. Ma Shangxi's voice came from the star boat. Lu Yi looked around and realized that they had arrived at the place where he had left the Soul Tribe's ancestral land. This was the territory of the K-Void Galaxy. There was an invisible passage that connected to the starry sky pond. Ordinary cultivators could not enter or even detect it. Only the Soul Clan could use their soul orbs to communicate with the ancestral land and let the ancestral land take them in. Lu Yi did not have a soul orb, but his rainbow divine lotus could replace it. Ma Shangxi's speed was not bad. It took the 2 of them less than 10 days to arrive at this place from the Yinyang Great Millstone. This was under the condition that they did not travel at full speed. One had to know that it took Lu Yi almost 2 months to get to the Yinyang Great Millstone from here. After a cultivator's cultivation base improved, the benefits of traveling also manifested. The time spent in space travel would inevitably be greatly reduced. Lu Yi estimated that if he were to return to the 9 continents from the Wanxiang Sea, it wouldn't take that long. He used the Rainbow Divine Lotus to sense his surroundings and pointed to a direction for Ma Shangxi. Although this place was not far from the invisible passage, it was still not the right place. If they wanted to return to the Soul Tribe's ancestral land, they could not deviate too much. The star boat traveled for another half a day before Lu Yi asked Ma Shangxi to stop. "Put the star boat away," Lu Yi ordered. Ma Shangxi obeyed. Lu Yi looked at him and said, "I'll put you in a place. When you're in there, behave yourself. Don't scare the flowers and plants inside." Ma Shangxi was a little confused. He did not understand what the Holy Sovereign meant, but he still nodded respectfully. Only then did Lu Ye's mind surge and he sent a message to Hua Qianying in the flower world, asking her to cooperate with him. He could borrow the Rainbow Divine Lotus and have the ancestral land take him back, but Ma Shangxi couldn't. Flesh and blood couldn't enter the soul race's ancestral land, unless it was a sacred beast like Hupa. Lu Yi could be considered a half-Spiritas now, but he wasn't willing to break the ancient rules of the Spiritas. Besides, he wasn't sure if he could bring Ma Shangxi in even if he did so. If there was a chance, Yang Kai would have to find someone he could trust. Even if Ma Shangxi was his blood warrior, he didn't want to expose his soul race ancestral land to her. Therefore, if he wanted to bring this fellow back to the land of the 9 prefectures, there was only one way right now, and that was to put him into the flower world. As his divine sense fluctuated, the void in front of Lu Yi began to distort, gradually transforming into a door. Even though Ma Shangxi was already at the late-stage Moonjade realm, he was still shocked to the core by this technique. He couldn't understand how Lu Yi had done it. "Go in," Lu Yi said. Ma Shangxi didn't dare to hesitate and hurriedly plunged into the door. When he reappeared, he was already in the flower world. Over at the flower world, Hua Qianying and Wuxia had already been notified by Lu Yi in advance, so they weren't too surprised to see Ma Shangxi suddenly appear. Ma Shangxi, on the other hand, was stunned. The wood spirit race and the spore race weren't very common in the starry sky, and this realm gave him a strange feeling. He had thought that the Holy Master had a small world, but now it seemed that this wasn't a small world but a true realm. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he didn't immediately associate it with the World King flower. The main reason was that the World King flower was too rare, and it was basically impossible for it to attach itself to a cultivator. After Ma Shangxi was settled, Lu Yi used his Rainbow Divine Lotus to communicate with the Soul Race's ancestral land. He had done this once before, so he wasn't unfamiliar with it. Lu Yi quickly discovered that after his cultivation had improved, the efficiency of communicating with the Soul Race's ancestral land had increased significantly. The last time he did this it took him 2 hours, but this time it only took him 2 hours. The passage to the ancestral land opened, and just like the first time Lu Yi saw Li Shang, a blooming lotus appeared in the void. He hurriedly flashed into the lotus, and by the time the lotus closed he had already disappeared. Somewhere in the Soul Race's ancestral land, Lu Yi appeared out of thin air. Under the nourishment of this special environment, his body and mind felt much more relaxed. The World King flower had always been in his divine sea, constantly devouring his soul force. Although he was constantly replenishing it, using external forces to replenish his soul force was ultimately a temporary solution. It was different after coming to the ancestral land. Here he could refine and absorb soul force everywhere, and Lu Yi suddenly felt the burden on his divine sea lessen. This feeling was like a mortal who had been in a claustrophobic environment for a long time, and then suddenly came to a vast land. Lu Yi felt that if he stayed here, the World King flower wouldn't be able to put any burden on him. A powerful aura suddenly approached and it was very familiar. Lu Yi turned his head and quickly saw a familiar figure appear in his field of vision. The other party was obviously surprised. "Little friend Lu? Why are you?" He hadn't been gone for long, 3 months at most, so why had he suddenly returned? As the elder on duty, Su Yuan was responsible for monitoring all abnormal movements in the ancestral land. No matter how quiet Lu Ye's return was, it couldn't escape his perception, so he came to take a look. He didn't expect to see Lu Yi here. Thinking about it, there weren't many clansmen coming in and out of the Soul Race's ancestral land. Even if clansmen above Yu Yao went out to travel, they wouldn't return in a short time. Which clansmen didn't go out for decades or even centuries. No one had ever returned after 3 months. Your cultivation. Su Yuan quickly discovered another problem. Lu Ye's cultivation had reached Yu Yao's. He was clearly at the peak of the star constellation realm before. "I made a breakthrough," Lu Yi replied with a smile. Su Yuan looked at him seriously and nodded. "It seems little friend Lu Yi has gained a lot." It's just this also. Although that was what he said, thinking about it carefully, he had gained a lot in the past few months. Advancing Yu Yao's cultivation wasn't a big deal, but he had obtained a World King flower and gifted it to the flower race, wood spirit race and spore race. He had also obtained a blood servant. There was no need to mention the white moon crystal, which was a gift from Ma Shangxi. In just a few months, Lu Yi had risen from the bottom of the starry sky to the middle of the starry sky. In the entire starry sky, Yu Yao was no weakling. Knowing that Su Yuan had come because of the commotion, Lu Yi said, "I'll go check on Hu Per and the others first. Elder, please take care of your business." Su Yuan nodded. "This old master is still at the starry sky pond. If you need anything, feel free to find me." Lu Yi thanked him. Seeing that Su Yuan was about to leave, he suddenly asked, "By the way, Elder, where is Li Shang's Lotus Continent?" The Soul Race ancestral land didn't have a star chart, so there wasn't much difference in the surrounding environment. Lu Ye's sudden return made it difficult for him to determine his direction. Su Yuan pointed him in a certain direction. Lu Yi immediately rushed in that direction. Not long after, a familiar 5-colored lotus continent appeared in his field of vision. He excitedly flew in that direction. He could already see the shocked expressions on Yi and Hu Po's faces when they saw him when he turned around. After parting a few months ago, the little girl definitely felt that they wouldn't be able to see each other again for a long time. Lu Yi also felt the same way at the time. Who would have thought that he could become half a Soul Race clansman with just a Rainbow Divine Lotus? He even had the ability to communicate with the ancestral land. The Lotus Continent was in full bloom, and it was completely silent. Not a single person could be seen. However, Lu Yi knew that every Soul Race clansman had their own space on the Lotus Continent. They wouldn't be disturbed by outsiders, and this made it convenient for them to cultivate. Therefore, even though there was no one here, they were all inside the Lotus Continent. Lu Yi landed on the Lotus continent and carefully identified the location that Yi had chosen. Before he could find it, a head suddenly popped out from nearby. The head then revealed a surprised expression. "You haven't left yet?" Li Shang was indeed very surprised. Logically speaking, Lu Yi should have left a few months ago. She didn't know why she saw him again today. She thought that Lu Yi hadn't left yet. "I left but I'm back." Lu Yi didn't treat himself as an outsider. He looked around and said, "Where's Yi's home?" Li Shang revealed herself and pointed to a location for Lu Yi. "It's here. However, Yi is in seclusion. Do you want me to wake her up?" Not only was Yi in seclusion, but all the ancestors of Immortal Essence City were also in seclusion. They had never come into contact with such an excellent cultivation environment. In the past few months, Li Shang had taught them all kinds of secret techniques of the soul race. As long as they succeeded in their cultivation, they would be a true soul race clansman. Therefore, whether it was Yi or the ancestors of Immortal Essence City, they all entered seclusion to cultivate. They knew that such an opportunity didn't come easily. No one was willing to waste time. Li Shang was also in seclusion. She had obtained the Rainbow Divine Lotus from the Lotus Pond last time. She intended to use it to break through her shackles and advance to Yu Yao. She had accumulated enough in the constellation. However, she was the master of this Lotus continent. Therefore, when Lu Yi arrived, she sensed it and took the initiative to show herself. If it weren't for Lu Yi, she would have continued her seclusion. Seclusion. Lu Yi knew that he came at the wrong time. No, he should have expected it. However, it seemed that he couldn't give her this surprise. "No need to shout. I won't be able to stay long." Although the environment in the ancestral land was good, he couldn't really stay here forever. The sooner the World King Flower was placed in the 9 regions, the sooner the World King Flower and the 9 regions could be harvested. End of chapter. Chapter 1690. It was better to place the Kai flower in 9 regions as early as possible. The earlier it was placed, the sooner 9 regions could get the benefits. Moreover, considering that the flower bearing the World King Flower was the Rainbow God Lotus, Lu Yi didn't dare to delay. From the looks of it, there was no problem with the Rainbow Divine Lotus. However, as time passed, no one could say for sure. Although the Rainbow Divine Lotus was miraculous, if something happened because of it, it would be an irreparable loss. Therefore, Lu Yi had originally planned to only come over to take a look before leaving. Now that Yi was in closed-door cultivation, there was naturally no need to disturb her. Anyway, there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. "Do I need to leave a message?" Li Shang asked. "That won't be necessary. You don't have to tell her that I've been here. The next time we meet, I'll tell her personally. Take care, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi came suddenly and left in a carefree manner. Looking at Lu Ye's departing figure, Li Shang finally came to his senses. He was extremely surprised. Yu Yao. She knew Lu Ye's strength better than anyone else. After all, she had been with Lu Yi day and night for several years. They had fought side by side and faced life and death together. Lu Yi was already so powerful when she was still in the Constellation Mansion. Now that she had ascended to the Constellation Mansion, how much stronger would Yu Yao become? Li Shang's expression turned solemn. He secretly made up his mind that he had to break through Yu Yao's cultivation during this period of seclusion. There was no reason why Lu Yi could break through, but she couldn't. Lu Yi arrived at the 7-colored Lotus Land where the Starry Sky Pond was located and found Elder Su Yuan easily. "Why are you back so soon?" Su Yuan felt that Lu Yi was a bit hasty. "Yi is in seclusion. She didn't see anyone." Lu Yi explained. Elder Su Yuan understood. "So that's how it is. What do you plan to do next? Where do you want to go with the help of the Starry Sky Pool?" "I do need to borrow the Starry Sky Pool," Lu Yi nodded, "but before that, there is something I would like to ask Elder." Su Yuan chuckled and said, "Little friend, there's no need to be polite. In any case, you're also half a clansman of our clan. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. This old man has lived for a long time. Although I don't have much ability, I have a lot of knowledge." Even though the Soul Tribe members spent most of their time in their ancestral lands, when their cultivation reached Yu Yao's level, many of them would travel outside. However, they usually hid themselves very well, so it was very rare for them to be discovered. Someone like Li Shang, who sneaked out of the Star Mansion, could not be found even in tens of thousands of years. "Elder, please take a look." Lu Yi didn't ask directly. Instead, he prepared to demonstrate. As soon as he finished speaking, he fiercely activated the power of his qi and blood. Su Yuan immediately revealed a shocked expression. Although the soul race didn't have a body of flesh and blood, he was still clear about the level of cultivator and the degree of power of blood vitality they possessed. Lu Yi had clearly just broken through to the Moon Jade tier, but the sudden burst of blood energy was no weaker than that of many late-stage Moon Jade tier cultivators he had seen before. This was clearly abnormal. Moreover, Su Yuan sensed that Lu Ye's blood vitality was slightly different from the Yu Yao he had seen before. As for what exactly was different, Su Yuan thought about it and felt that Lu Ye's vitality seemed to be more solid. If Yu Yao's vitality chi could be compared to a wooden plank, then Lu Ye's vitality chi could be compared to a stone slab. And this was not the limit. As Lu Yi activated the power of his vitality chi, the power of his vitality chi surged even more violently. Even though he was only an early-stage Moon Jade tier cultivator, Su Yuan felt as if he could see a vast sea of blood engulfing him. Then, something even stranger happened. When Lu Ye's blood chi power was pushed to the extreme, a blood-red mark suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. The mark looked like a star. The flower of the body. Elder Su Yuan exclaimed. "Huh!" Lu Yi was stunned. His vitality chi weakened and the star mark between his brows disappeared. He looked at Su Yuan and confirmed that he hadn't heard wrong. Moreover, it seemed like Su Yuan knew what the star mark was. He couldn't help but feel delighted. It seemed like Su Yuan had asked the right question. He had originally planned to ask about the star mark when he had the opportunity to meet the reincarnation tree in the future. After all, the reason he had gone to the Yin-Yang Great Millstone was because of the reincarnation tree's guidance. When he had met Su Yuan earlier, he had only wanted to ask about it on the spur of the moment. Now it seemed like Su Yuan knew something about it. "What is the flower of the body?" Lu Yi humbly asked. Su Yuan looked at Lu Yi with a complicated expression and said, "Congratulations, little friend. You've condensed the flower of the body. This undoubtedly means that you've reached the peak of the constellation realm." Lu Yi understood and said, "Reaching the peak of the constellation realm can condense the flower of the body?" "That's right." Su Yuan nodded and continued, "Of course my soul race doesn't have a physical body, so no one has ever condensed the flower of the body. Therefore this information was brought back by my clansmen who went out. If it's convenient, I would like to ask Elder for some guidance." Su Yuan chuckled and said, "It's not inconvenient at all. It's not a secret either. If you had a knowledgeable senior to guide you, you would have already known about this." After a brief pause, Su Yuan said, "Do you know why the upper three realms of the starry sky are named Sun, Moon, and Star? Is it easy to distinguish?" Lu Yi replied matter-of-factly. "This is only one of the reasons. The biggest reason is the flower of the body you just displayed, which is the mark of a star. That's why that realm is called the constellation realm. Of course, not every constellation realm can condense their own flower of the body. In fact, there are very, very few who can do this. Only those who reach the peak of the constellation realm can condense the flower of the body." Lu Yi pondered. The upper three realms correspond to the essence of body, the chi of law, and the soul of soul. So, if one reaches the peak of the Moon Jade realm and the Sun Reflection realm, one can condense something similar? "That's right." Su Yuan looked at Lu Yi as if he had learned something. The flower of the body is the mark of a star. It is said that the flower of chi is the mark of a crescent moon, and the flower of soul is the mark of a sun. That's why there's such a thing as the constellation realm, the Moon Jade realm, and the Sun Reflection realm. Lu Yi looked enlightened and finally understood the origin of the names of the upper three realms. Fortunately, Su Yuan had a long lifespan. The lifespan of the soul race was much longer than that of ordinary living beings, so his knowledge was naturally incomparable to that of ordinary cultivators. If it were the Sun Reflection realm, he might not know these things. Even if it was common knowledge since ancient times, there were too few cultivators who could condense the flower of the body. If they hadn't seen it before, it naturally couldn't be considered common knowledge. What's the use of this thing? Lu Yi was puzzled. Although it was a sign that one had reached the peak of the constellation realm, Lu Yi really didn't find any use for the flower of the body. It only appeared when he was risking his life. Su Yuan shook his head. As for the specific use, this old man doesn't know, but I've heard people say that the flower of the body does have some benefits. That was as good as not saying anything. But if a cultivator can condense the flower of the body, the flower of chi, and the flower of soul, when the three flowers are gathered, they will have the ability to transcend. The ability to transcend? Lu Yi looked curious. Please enlighten me, Elder. Oh. Su Yuan showed a thoughtful expression and then simply said, I don't know. Lu Ye's eyes twitched. If you don't know, why are you thinking? You make it sound like you know. The soul race doesn't have a body of flesh and blood. Since ancient times there has never been such a race. So, this old man only knows about it from ancient records. Su Yuan explained. Then does the patriarch know? Lu Yi asked. Su Yuan didn't seem reliable, he wanted to ask someone else. Su Yuan said, I don't know if the patriarch knows or not, but you can't see him now. He's in seclusion. The patriarch is also in seclusion? Lu Yi was speechless. Why is everyone in seclusion? Su Yuan couldn't help but glance at Lu Yi. It's all because of you. If not for you, Hun Ke wouldn't need to go into seclusion. After Lu Yi left that day, Hun Ke went into seclusion to communicate with the ancestral land's will. He wanted to understand the situation on Lu Ye's side. A human was able to make contact with the ancestral land's will, and even made it pass down such an instruction. He even obtained the rainbow god Lotus from the Lotus Pond and became half a member of the soul race. These were all important matters. As the patriarch of the soul race, Hun Ke naturally wanted to know. Anyway, just remember that the flower of the body is definitely something good. Okay. Lu Yi also knew that it was something good, but he didn't know what it was used for. He was still a little curious. The only thing he knew now was that it was a sign that he had reached the peak of the constellation realm. From the looks of it, he had no regrets in the constellation realm. The reincarnation tree probably guided him to the yin-yang great millstone so that he could condense his own flower of the body. Lu Yi didn't see Yi when he came here, so he only understood a little about the flower of the body. Lu Yi felt a little uncomfortable. Elder, the soul jades are almost gone. Can you? Su Yuan looked at him in surprise. You ate 1,000 soul jades? Although soul jades were only equivalent to spiritual jades, they were a resource that replenished soul power. Therefore they were much more precious than spiritual jades. Su Yuan had given Lu Yi 1,000 soul jades back then. It should have been enough for him to use them for a long time. It had only been a few months but they were almost gone? Su Yuan asked casually. He didn't know that he was right. Lu Yi had eaten those soul jades. It's almost gone anyway. There were still 300 soul jades left. However, he was half a member of the soul race. This was half a home. Since he was home, he should take some things. With the rich environment of the soul race's ancestral land, Lu Yi felt that there should be no shortage of soul jades. Su Yuan seemed to have seen through his thoughts and said, soul jades require us to take the initiative to condense them. They are not like spirit jades that can be born naturally. This was why Su Yuan had given him 1,000 soul jades last time. It wasn't that the soul race was stingy, but that time was tight. They could only form so many. End of chapter. Chapter 1691. The soul race lived in an environment like the ancestral land, so soul jades were basically useless. If they wanted to cultivate, they could just cultivate on the lotus land. Only when they left the ancestral land could the soul race spend some effort to condense some soul jades. However, Lu Yi still obtained more than 200 soul jades from Su Yuan. These were the leftovers from Su Yuan's last trip. It had been many years since then. Since he had no use for them, he gave them to Lu Yi when he asked for them. An old man and a young man stood next to the starry sky pond. However, it was not easy to find the path to the 9 prefectures in the starry sky pond. This was because Lu Yi could not pinpoint the exact location of the 9 prefectures. Therefore, he could only ask for Su Yuan's help. He had been overseeing this place for many years. When he had nothing to do, he would study the starry sky pond. His understanding of the environment in the starry sky was naturally not something Lu Yi could compare to. Where are we going this time? Jade Conch Galaxy. Lu Yi spoke and gave a rough location. It would be best if there was a path to the Jade Conch Galaxy in the starry sky pond. Su Yuan said, tell me about a landmark. I've never heard of this galaxy before. There were many galaxies in the starry sky. Su Yuan had not heard of every galaxy. If he had never heard of a place, it would be impossible for him to find the corresponding location in the starry sky pond. What about the chaotic explosion zone? Lu Yi settled for the next best thing. Su Yuan shook his head. Thousand Hills Grave? Lu Yi asked again. If Su Yuan could pinpoint any location, he could use it to deduce the location of the Jade Conch Galaxy in the 9 prefectures. Unfortunately, Su Yuan had never even heard of a space wonder like the Thousand Hills Grave. Indefinite Jingyue Beixian Daluo Galaxy? If he still could not pinpoint the location, Lu Yi really did not know how to find the corresponding location of the 9 prefectures in the starry sky pond. This was because he was only familiar with this path. As for starting from the Wanxiang Sea, it was not reliable. After leaving the Wanxiang Sea and passing through the Long Cloud Galaxy, one would need to pass through a bug path that led directly into the Mist Dragon Wonder. There was a gap in the middle, so he could not follow the path to deduce the location. Fortunately, Su Yuan finally nodded. I know the Daluo Galaxy. Lu Yi immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Su Yuan's spiritual will surged, starting to get busy. Soon he said, found it? Hearing this, Lu Yi immediately released his divine sense and followed Su Yuan's guidance, immersing his mind into the starry sky pool. This location is near the Daluo star system. The rest is up to you. No problem. Lu Yi nodded. As long as they could locate Big Luo, it would not be difficult to deduce the direction of the Jade Conch. Lu Ye's mind was immersed in the starry pool, and it was as if he had really arrived in the vast starry sky. As his mind traveled, Lu Yi quickly found the projection of the indefinite galaxy in the starry pool. He continued to move forward, and in an instant, his mind crossed the battlefield where he had fought against the insect and blood clans. He then passed through the Thousand-Mound Grave and passed through the chaotic explosion zone. Positioning Jade Conch. Lu Yi easily found the specific location of the Qingli Dao world and even found the projection of the Jade Conch world. Speaking of which, Lu Yi had never been to the Jade Conch world before. Previously he had planned to go there personally, but he had been in a hurry. There were some things he could only entrust to Wu Zhuo. After silently memorizing the specific location of the Jade Conch world, Lu Yi began to search for traces of the 9 regions. It was easy to find. This was because beside the projection of the 9 regions in the starry pool, there was another extremely distinctive thing. The blood-refining world. Looking down from the starry sky, the blood-refining world looked like the body of a female giant who had her head and limbs cut off. When it was projected into the starry pool, it was still the same except that it was many times smaller. Therefore, when he saw this distinctive projection, Lu Yi knew that the region beside it was undoubtedly the 9 regions. Now that he had found the projection of the 9 regions in the starry pool, the rest was easy. He only needed to search for a passage that could be entered and exited. After a few breaths, Lu Yi locked onto a location. Elder, I'm going. Lu Yi turned around and greeted Su Yuan. Then he followed the passage and plunged into the starry pool, disappearing from sight. Ha 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 ha. Su Yuan shook his head. He felt that young people were really troublesome. However, when he thought of his own younger days, he did not seem to be any better. Time was long and it was gone forever. Somewhere in the starry sky of the Jade Conch galaxy, a few star beasts were migrating. Their bodies were round and they looked like rubber balls. Their bodies were black and white with 2 big ones and 3 small ones. They were arranged in a neat formation. No one knew where they came from or where they were going. This should be a family of 5. Just as they were leisurely traversing through the starry sky, the void beside them suddenly distorted. When the 5-star beasts saw this, they were all shocked. Then, one after another, the colors on their bodies changed. Even their round bodies began to distort. In the blink of an eye, the 5-star beasts turned into 5 meteorite-like objects and drifted in all directions. There was no aura left on their bodies, as if they were real meteorites. The distortion in the void became more and more intense until a certain moment, a figure suddenly stepped out of it. Lu Yi turned to look at the stars around him and found that they were not familiar. When he had just ascended to the constellation realm, although he had left the 9 prefectures to explore, he had only explored one direction. If he was in that direction, he would have left a mark on the stars along the way. As for the other directions, he would not know. The starry sky pool should not be wrong. He had definitely arrived at the Jade Conch galaxy. As for how far away he was from the 9 prefectures, he had no way of knowing. Lu Ye's gaze swept across the 5 meteorites. He did not pay much attention to them at first, but he soon realized that something was wrong. These weren't meteorites at all. They were 5-star beasts. If he was not wrong, these were meteorite beasts? Lu Yi understood, but he did not expose their disguises. Meteorite beasts were not dangerous. Moreover, they were naturally timid. No matter how much they cultivated, this could not change. As long as there was a slight disturbance, they would immediately disguise themselves as meteorites. However, their disguises were extremely clever. Even star beasts stronger than them would not be able to detect them. Hence, meteorite beasts often used this special method to avoid potential dangers. He pretended not to see them. Lu Yi pressed his hand on his battlefield mark and called out mentally, Little 9, Little 9. If this place was near the 9 prefectures, then he should be able to contact Little 9 and have it lead the way. Very quickly there was a reply from the mark. Little 9's voice was filled with astonishment and surprise. Lu Yi? Haha, I'm back. Lu Yi replied. At the same time he felt lucky. It seemed that this place was not far from the 9 prefectures. Otherwise, he would not be able to contact Little Nine so easily. Why are you back? Little Nine was still in disbelief. Am I not welcome? Then I'll leave? Lu Yi teased. Little Nine hurriedly said, How could that be? I'm just very surprised. Why are you back so quickly? When Lu Yi left last time, he said that he was going to bring people to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. How long had it been? At most, it was only 3 years. But according to Little Nine's understanding, this trip to the 10,000 Elephant Sea, even if they hurried, would take 3 to 4 years. A round trip would take 7 to 8 years. Lu Yi appearing near the 9 prefectures at this time was obviously not normal. Did he meet with some accident on the way? Little Nine could not help but let his imagination run wild. It's a long story. I'll tell you later. First show me the way. I'm a little confused. Little Nine pointed in a direction for Lu Yi. Lu Yi communicated with Hua Qianying in the Flower Realm. Then he asked her to open the door to the Flower Realm and let Ma Shangxi out. Holy Master! Ma Shangxi had obediently stayed in the Flower Realm for several days. When he saw Lu Yi, he hurriedly bowed. Go that way. Lu Yi pointed in a direction. Yes. Ma Shangxi replied. Then he summoned the star boat and flew forward with Lu Yi. Lu Yi sat on the star boat and chatted with Little Nine. Soon Little Nine knew why he had returned so quickly. When he learned that the starry sky pool in the ancestral land of the soul race had such a mysterious ability, Little Nine was both shocked and delighted. Doesn't this mean that you can come back whenever you want in the future? It's not that simple. After all, the passageways to and from the ancestral land of the soul race are fixed and scattered. However, it's not as difficult as before. Lu Yi originally thought that once the Jade Conk's insect path stabilized, it would be very convenient for him to travel between the 10,000 Elephant Sea and the local star system. Who knew that before the Jade Conk's insect path stabilized, the starry sky pool of the soul race's ancestral land would be a help. As for which was more convenient, it was hard to say. However, considering the uniqueness of the soul race's ancestral land, only he could use this method for now. He could not bring a large group of people into the soul race's ancestral land to use the starry sky pool as a transit point. He could use it because he was already half a member of the soul race. Su Yuan and Hun Ke did not treat him as an outsider. However, if he wanted to use this method to make things more convenient for the 9 prefectures' cultivators, it was not suitable. Not to mention whether the soul race would agree or not, he would be embarrassed to do it himself. I brought you something good. What good thing? Little Nine's tone was filled with anticipation. You'll know when you see it. Lu Yi kept her in suspense. The wreckage of the realm was secondary. It could not bring much improvement to the 9 prefectures. It could only be treated as a snack for Little Nine. However, a divine item like the Flower Realm was rarely seen. He believed that Little Nine would be happy to accept the Flower Realm. Similarly, the Flower Race would not reject such a large realm that could grow quickly. Right now, the 9 prefectures' foundation was not strong. However, its potential was second to none in the entire galaxy. After all, 10,000 years ago, the 9 prefectures was a top realm. Even if it had fallen, it had the capital to make a comeback. When they reached the 9 prefectures, he would arrange for Hua Qianying to see the 9 prefectures' glory. Along the way, he chatted with Little Nine and found out that the 9 prefectures' current situation was very peaceful. Moreover, they had already established contact with the Green Li Dao realm and the Jade Conch realm. Occasionally, there would be cultivators coming and going. There were only 3 large realms in a galaxy. Naturally, they had to move around more. Especially since the cultivators of the 3 realms had already joined forces to attack the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Chapter 1692. Lu Yi was happy that everything in the 9 states was on the right track. Who wouldn't want their homeland to become better and better? This was especially true when he worked hard to improve it. He could foresee that as the 9 states grew, many Yu Yao and even Sunshine would be born in the future. When that time came, whether the Jade Conch galaxy could maintain its position as the leader of this galaxy would be another matter. However, even if that happened, the Jade Conch galaxy couldn't change its name because the 2 words 9 states could not be casually exposed. Little Nine was like a chatterbox, chatting endlessly with Lu Yi about all the trivial things that had happened in the 9 states, such as which sect had produced a decent genius, which constellation had ventured deep into space and made great gains. Lu Yi knew that Little Nine had been holding back for too long. Moreover, no one in the 9 states knew of its existence, so it couldn't find anyone to talk to. It was rare for Lu Yi to return, so it couldn't stop talking. Lu Yi didn't show any impatience. He listened while casually replying to Little Nine. Ah! A cry of surprise suddenly sounded, interrupting Lu Yi and Little Nine's conversation. Lu Yi raised his head and shot a dissatisfied glance at Ma Shangxi, who was steering the star boat. What's with the fuss? It was already the late Yu Yao stage, so why was he still so immature? Ma Shangxi hurriedly turned around and said respectfully, "Please forgive me, sacred master. This lowly one saw an unbelievable scene and was unable to control my emotions." Lu Yi didn't understand. What's unbelievable? Ma Shangxi excitedly raised his head and peered into the distance. The blood ancestor's body, that's the blood ancestor's body. Lu Yi followed his gaze and found that they weren't far from the 9 states because the blood refining realm had already appeared in his field of vision. The late Yu Yao stage was indeed fast. Of course, this was also related to the fact that he hadn't been far from the 9 states. It had only been a few days, but they were already close to the 9 states. As for the blood ancestor's body, it was undoubtedly the blood refining realm. Blood ancestor? Lu Ye's heart shook. Tell me more. Ma Shangxi cautiously glanced at Lu Yi. After spending some time together, he was now certain of one thing. The sacred sovereign before him was the target of the clan's bounty, Lu Yi of the 9 heavens, who had once destroyed all the younger generation of the blood race at the alpha origin stage. To be honest, Ma Shangxi almost collapsed after confirming this matter because he couldn't understand how such a powerful heavenly sovereign could be Lu Yi's true body. In fact, there were many guesses in his heart, but he didn't dare to ask. When Lu Yi asked about the blood ancestor, Ma Shangxi finally mustered up her courage and asked cautiously, "May I ask about the holy sovereign's background?" He wanted to ask if Lu Yi was a human or a member of the blood tribe. After all, if Lu Yi was a member of the blood tribe, there was no way Yu Yao wouldn't know about the blood ancestor. The words were already at the tip of his tongue, but he didn't dare to ask any further, for fear of receiving an answer that he didn't want. He didn't ask, but Lu Yi knew what he was thinking. She simply looked at him with a smile. Ma Shangxi shuddered and hurriedly explained, "The blood ancestor is the origin of our blood race. Rumor has it that the blood ancestor was born with the starry sky, and after a great battle with an unknown powerhouse, he was dismembered and died. Now, the few most powerful realms that our blood race occupies are all part of the blood ancestor's body, but until now, there is still one most important part that has not been found." Lu Yi understood. The blood ancestor's body? Yes. Ma Shangxi nodded. He never expected to see a legendary object in such a place. Even from a great distance away, Ma Shangxi could still feel a trace of connection from her bloodline to the domain formed by the enormous body that stretched across the starry sky. Therefore, he was certain that it was the blood ancestor's body. Lu Yi revealed a thoughtful expression. Speaking of which, the blood race didn't just reproduce between members of their own race. The blood race could also use human women to give birth to blood babies. Lan Qiue was a victim of this. From this, it could be seen that the bloodline inheritance of the blood race was very powerful. It wasn't difficult for them to reproduce. Lu Yi had only guessed that the blood refining realm was the body of a female expert, but he didn't know that this expert had such a background. The blood ancestor was born with the starry sky and was the origin of the blood race. Such a powerful existence, what was it that killed it? He couldn't help but recall what Yang Qing had said when she saw the blood refining realm in the starry sky. At that time, Yang Qing had a restless expression and bluntly said that if this thing was alive, it would be very satisfying to fight it. You're saying that the domains formed from parts of the blood race's bodies are all top-level domains? Lu Yi asked. Ma Shangxi nodded. There are a total of 5 domains, each of which is a top-level domain. There are countless experts in each domain, and the sacred blood of our race's holy venerate basically comes from these 5 domains. At this point, Ma Shangxi suddenly understood. He was wondering why this holy venerate's sacred nature was so strong. A drop of precious blood that she casually bestowed was comparable to a drop of sacred blood. With the blood ancestor's body here, sacred blood was naturally not difficult to find. Lu Yi revealed a thoughtful expression. 5 domains corresponded to 4 limbs and a head, which happened to be 5 domains. However, these 5 domains were all top-level domains. The blood race was extraordinarily rich. Then why was the blood refining realm formed from the body of the blood race so low level? When the blood refining realm attacked, it hadn't been promoted to a large-scale domain. At that time, the blood refining realm was not a top-level domain. Any random constellation could destroy the 9 states. However, because it was only a low-level domain, it was annexed by the 9 states. What are you thinking about? Lu Yi suddenly sensed that Ma Shangxi had some strange thoughts and quickly asked. Ma Shangxi didn't dare to hide anything and quickly said, Holy Venerate, I've seen the ancient records left behind by my ancestor. It said that if the blood ancestor's separated body could be put back together again, the blood ancestor could be resurrected. Exclamation point. Lu Yi was shocked. Resurrection from the dead. This wasn't the first time he'd heard of this. As early as when he refined the sacred blood and obtained the inheritance of the blood race, he knew that if he cultivated the blood ancestor's inheritance to the extreme, he could be reborn from a drop of blood. Of course, being reborn from a drop of blood wasn't very reliable, but resurrection from the dead wasn't impossible. If Ma Shangxi knew about this, then the powerhouses of the blood race must also know. The blood ancestor's body was divided into 6 parts. At present, the blood race only occupied 5 parts, and the other body was in the 9 states. Didn't this mean that if the news leaked out, the blood race would definitely snatch the blood refining realm away at all costs? It didn't matter if the blood refining realm was snatched away, but if the blood ancestor really came back from the dead, it would be a big problem. Lu Yi didn't dare to imagine the strength of such a huge existence. Currently, the blood race's situation in the starry sky wasn't good. They were basically hated by everyone. If there was a chance, they would definitely be willing to resurrect the blood ancestor. This way they would have a strong enough backer. Many thoughts flashed through Lu Ye's mind. He knew that no matter how unreliable the blood ancestor's resurrection was, once the blood ancestor found out that there was a blood refinement realm here, the 9 states would inevitably face a catastrophe. As for why the other 5 worlds were top-level worlds while the blood refining realm was only a low-level world, Lu Yi didn't understand. He only vaguely felt that there were some secrets hidden here. Holy Senior, please allow this humble servant to enter and cultivate. This humble servant feels that if he can cultivate in that place perhaps, don't even think about it. Lu Yi immediately rejected him. Although in theory he could control the life and death of a blood warrior, if the difference in strength between them was too great, Lu Yi wasn't sure what the result would be. Ma Shangxi was only at the peak of Yu Yao. If he really broke through to the Sunshine Realm, would he still be able to completely control him? If not, with the current heritage of the 9 states, they wouldn't be able to resist. In any case, Lu Yi wouldn't allow such a potential crisis to occur. Of course, if he grew stronger in the future, he could let Ma Shangxi give it a try. After being ruthlessly rejected by Lu Yi, Ma Shangxi's expression fell. This was because he could feel that the opportunity for him to break through to the Sunshine Realm was in the world formed by the body of the blood ancestor. However, since the Holy Senior didn't allow it, he could only obey. He didn't dare to resist, and he didn't even dare to show any dissatisfaction in his heart. As they spoke, they got closer and closer to the 9 states. Who are you? The 9 states is close to the sky. Do not trespass. A voice came from afar. On a few nearby meteorites, several figures rushed out and outflanked them. This was the star mansion that was responsible for guarding the 9 states. Every large world had such an arrangement. The main purpose of guarding against meteorites that attacked the world was to guard against the potential threat of some star beast. Although most star beasts weren't interested in the world, they couldn't be lumped together. For example, the Heaven Desire demon spider that Lu Yi encountered before, once it invaded a world, it would bring disaster. They all recognized the star boats of the 9 states, so they wouldn't stop their own people from returning. However, the star boat driven by Ma Shangxi looked unfamiliar, so they naturally had to stop him. Of course, because the 9 states had been in contact with the Green Dawn Dao realm and the Jade Conch realm in recent years, they all thought that he was a guest from the other 2 realms. However, the closer they got, the more the star mansion of the 9 states were surprised. This was because the star boat was emitting Yu Yao's aura. Although the 9 states had been in contact with the other 2 realms, it was mostly between the star mansion. Yu Yao had never come to the 9 states before. For a moment, the star mansion of the 9 states couldn't figure out the other party's origins, so they all became vigilant. At this moment, a familiar voice traveled into their ears. Don't be nervous. I'm back. The star mansion of the 9 states were stunned, but they immediately reacted. The leader said in disbelief, Lu Yi? Lu Yi had already stood up and revealed himself. The few of them looked over and found that it was indeed Lu Yi. Beaming with joy, they quickly gathered around him and landed on the star boat. How could they not be happy? The last time Lu Yi came back, he took 300 people with him. He said that he was going to the most prosperous 10,000 elephant sea in the universe. Too many people didn't get the chance to take this opportunity, so they could only wait for the next time. However, only 3 years had passed and Lu Yi had returned. This made them immediately see an opportunity. End of chapter. Chapter 1693. There were many constellations in the 9 states, so it was impossible for Lu Yi to know everyone. However, because they had fought together in the underground insect nest and the blood refinement realm, even if they did not know each other, they were familiar with each other. Lu Yi was not familiar with these constellations. Lu Yi was not familiar with them, but they were familiar with Lu Yi. Moreover, regardless of their origins, the constellations in the 9 states now got along very well. After chatting with Lu Yi for a while, a middle-aged constellation from the Dingzhou asked, "Lu Yi, how many people are you going to bring to the Wanxiang Sea this time?" The others also looked at him eagerly, their eyes full of anticipation. Lu Yi said, "The Wanxiang Sea has just started, and the situation has not stabilized yet. We'll make plans after it stabilizes." They were not disappointed, knowing that it was not easy to establish a foothold in a place like the Wanxiang Sea with Jade Conk's foundation. It had only been a few years, so it was normal that the situation had not stabilized yet. The constellation who spoke nodded and said, "If you choose to go to the Wanxiang Sea next time, let us know in advance so that we can make preparations." "Of course. Then you go back first, we still have to stay here. Thank you for your hard work." The star boat flew straight to the 9 states. Soon, all the constellations in the 9 states that could be contacted knew that Lu Yi had returned, and they were all excited and expectant. At this time, Lu Yi had already returned to the Ao Mountain in the War State. The Jade Blood sect was now a first-rank sect in the 9 states. When Lu Yi first joined the Jade Blood sect, the sect's encampment in the Spirit Stream battlefield was still at the outermost area, but now the sect's encampment was in the core area, occupying the best area. The spirit chi of heaven and earth there was extremely dense, and it was better for cultivators of the Spirit Stream realm to cultivate and grow. The Jade Blood sect had a few constellations, but they were all at the Wanxiang Sea now. Therefore the Jade Blood sect now only had the Spirit Ocean. With Lu Ye's current cultivation, it was easy for him to sneak into the Jade Blood sect without anyone noticing. He returned to his Jade Bamboo Peak without alerting anyone. "Build a place for yourself and don't wander around if you have nothing to do," Lu Yi instructed Ma Shangxi. There were only a few bamboo buildings in the Green Bamboo Peak, and they were the residences of Lu Yi and the people closest to him. Although he had not returned for several years, there was no change because the Spirit Peak was protected by a large formation all year round. Of course, Lu Yi wouldn't allow Ma Shangxi to live in such a place. With his abilities as a late-stage Moon Jade, it would be easy for him to find a place to stay. Barely after he finished issuing his instructions, a light flashed beside him, and a snow-white rabbit abruptly appeared beside him. Ma Shangxi glanced at it in astonishment and discovered that even with her eyesight, she was unable to clearly see how the rabbit had appeared and was momentarily surprised. Then he saw the Lord walking towards the rabbit with a big smile on his face. He carried the rabbit and rubbed it as if they were very familiar with each other. Ma Shangxi didn't look any further and turned around to get busy. "How come you seem to have gotten fatter after not seeing you for a while?" Lu Yi rubbed Little Nine, feeling that it was not bad. Little Nine had always been in the form of a rabbit. Lu Yi didn't know why, but this time she could clearly feel that it had become fatter. It probably had a lot to do with the growth of the 9 States Foundation. Ever since the 9 States had been promoted to a large bounded domain, Little Nine had been controlling the 9 States to devour the blood-refining world and the foundation of the Wushuang continent. In addition to the growth of the 9 States itself, although the 9 States was still a large bounded domain, its foundation was undoubtedly much stronger than when it had just been promoted. "Stop it. It's ticklish." Little Nine struggled, but how could it escape from Lu Ye's claws? After playing around for a while, Lu Yi finally let it go. Little Nine was huffing and puffing. "I've brought you something good." Lu Yi spoke, and then took out a large piece of the bounded domain's remains that Ma Shangxi had bought from the market. When Little Nine saw it, its eyes couldn't help but light up. Then it waved its rabbit paw, and before Lu Yi could understand, the large piece of bounded domain's remains disappeared. It was unknown where it had been taken to. "It's rare that you still remember. I thought you had forgotten." Little Nine narrowed its eyes, obviously very happy. "That won't happen. I definitely remember what I promised you." Lu Yi patted its little head. "It's just that this kind of thing is very rare. It's basically impossible to come across it normally." Little Nine said, "It's enough that you have the heart. It's very expensive to buy it, right? You should keep the spirit jades and cultivate yourself. You've only been promoted to a constellation realm for a few years, so you need spirit jades. Don't buy it next time? As it spoke, Little Nine paused and looked at Lu Yi suspiciously. What's your cultivation level now? It had a feeling that Lu Ye's cultivation was not as simple as a constellation realm. Lu Yi smiled when she heard this and slightly circulated her magic power. Little Nine's expression was shocked. Yu Yao? How long had it been and she had already promoted Yu Yao? Although Lu Yi was already at the late stage of the constellation realm when she returned last time, it was not that easy for a constellation realm to promote Yu Yao. After all, this was a breakthrough of a large realm. In the starry skies, who knew how many constellations had been stuck at this point, unable to advance even an inch? Some had even been stuck for their entire lives. It knew that it was impossible that Lu Yi could not promote Yu Yao, but it did not expect it to be so fast. Lu Yi said, Yu Yao sounds good, but in the end she's only a mid-level power in the starry skies. There was still Ri Guang above her. With his current strength, if he encountered Ri Guang, he really did not have much power to fight back. The path of cultivation was long and he still needed to work hard. If he could one day become Ri Guang, he would have the capital to look down on this part of the starry skies. Lu Yi believed that this matter would not be too far away. I have something good to give you, Lu Yi said mysteriously. Little Nine's interest was piqued. What is it? Do you know about the Realm King flower? Lu Yi asked. Little Nine's rabbit head nodded. The Realm King flower is so famous, of course I know about it. Although the previous 9 states era had been destroyed, many things had been left behind. Little Nine was born from the combination of the will of heaven and earth and the tool spirit, so it knew a lot of common knowledge about the starry skies. Of course, the things it knew were scattered and it did not know everything. The Realm King flower was something it happened to know about. You found the Realm King flower? Little Nine asked in surprise. Lu Yi smiled. I even brought it back. Little Nine was shocked. After being stunned for a long time, it impatiently said, Since you brought it back, quickly let it attach to the 9 states. This way, whether it is for the Realm King flower or the 9 states, it will be greatly beneficial. That's what I was thinking, but whether it is willing or not is another matter. We have to let it see the environment of the 9 states first. Of course, Lu Yi wouldn't force others to do something they didn't want to do, nor would he force them to do so. However, he believed that after Hua Qianying saw the environment of 9 regions, he wouldn't refuse to let the Kai flower attach itself to 9 regions. Lu Yi briefly explained the situation of the Realm King flower, and then told Little Nine, I will talk to the flower clan leader, you don't need to say anything. Little Nine jumped into Lu Ye's arms and burrowed into his clothes, only revealing its head. It nodded obediently. I know I am a pet beast. Lu Yi laughed. How could there be a pet beast like you? You look so harmless. His mind was immersed in the flower realm, and he transmitted his voice to Hua Qianying. Fellow Taoist, we have arrived at my homeland. Do you want to come out and take a look? Hua Qianying immediately replied, Then I will have to trouble you. She was also looking forward to it. After all, the realm that the World King flower had attached itself to had already shattered. Without a target to attach itself to, the flower realm could not grow. It couldn't stay in Lu Ye's divine sea forever. Not to mention whether or not Lu Yi could withstand it, it wouldn't do the flower realm any good. Moreover, if the flower realm could not grow, then the flower clan that was born in the flower realm could not grow either. Therefore, finding a new realm to attach to was the next thing to do. Lu Yi saved them and saved the entire flower realm. According to him, his hometown was a realm that had just been promoted not long ago. This was obviously the best place for the Realm King flower to attach to. Therefore, Hua Qianying did not reject this matter. Taking a step back, even if Lu Ye's hometown was a top-level realm, if Lu Yi wanted the Realm King flower to attach to, Hua Qianying would not refuse. It was not that there were no benefits for the Realm King flower to attach to a top-level realm, but the growth of a top-level realm was already very slow. The flower realm could not quickly get feedback from it, so the benefits were not that great. With the two of them working together, the door to the flower realm appeared and Hua Qianying walked out. Sensing the situation of the 9 states, Hua Qianying was slightly puzzled. Fellow Taoist, how long has it been since this realm was promoted to a large realm? Lu Yi calculated and said, almost 14 years. After saying that, Lu Yi was stunned for a moment. It had already been 14 years. Thinking back to the time when the 9 states army went on an expedition to the blood-refining world and fought a bloody battle with the blood race, everything of the past was still vivid in his mind. At that time he was only a sixth-order divine sea. Time passed really quickly. The higher one's cultivation, the less they could feel the passage of time. No wonder some cultivators went into seclusion for decades. Lu Yi was one of the few people who went into seclusion because his cultivation efficiency was very high. He basically did not need to go into seclusion. Is fellow Taoist not mistaken? Hua Qianying frowned. Of course not. Is there a problem? Lu Yi said. Hua Qianying hesitated for a moment before saying, fellow Taoist's hometown is indeed a large realm, but it does not seem to have been promoted just a decade ago. It seems to have been promoted for hundreds of years or even longer. How could a large realm that had been promoted for more than a decade have such a deep foundation? Lu Yi instantly reacted. Hua Qianying obviously thought that he was lying to her, so he smiled and said, is that so? Let me show fellow Taoist around and you will know what's going on. Then I'll have to trouble you. Although she had made up her mind to let the flower realm attach to Lu Ye's hometown, there was no harm in learning more about this realm. And judging from the current situation, this realm was indeed very suitable for the World King Flower to attach to. Immediately, Lu Yi took Hua Qianying to tour around the 9 states. After leaving Ao Mountain, the two did not hide their auras, so of course they were detected by many star mansions. Moreover, when Lu Yi just returned, the news had already spread, so when Lu Yi took Hua Qianying to tour around, many star mansions came over to chat with Lu Yi. Chapter 1694. Not for anything else but to get familiar with them. Moreover, Lu Yi had contributed greatly to the current development of the 9 states. These constellations all remembered his kindness. Seeing a beautiful girl by Lu Ye's side, the constellations all had a tacit understanding. Lu Ye was young and promising with a bright future. It was normal for him to kidnap a girl from the outside, so there was nothing to investigate. Half a day later, Hua Qianying, who had followed Lu Yi around most of the 9 regions, said, now I believe what you said. This was indeed a large realm that had just been promoted. Because the constellations they met along the way were all at the early stage of the constellation. This was undoubtedly in line with a realm that had just been promoted for more than 10 years. Lu Ye's cultivation, on the other hand, was not normal, but he had told Hua Qianying about it before. But, why is that? Hua Qianying was puzzled. She sensed that the foundation of the 9 regions was very good, which was not something a 14-year-old realm could have. Come with me, Lu Yi said and soared into the sky. After a short while, Hua Qianying stood in the starry sky and looked back in the direction of the 9 regions in shock. What shocked her was not only the blood-refining realm next to the 9 regions, but also the wonderful connection between the 2 realms. Your realm is devouring the foundation of another realm? Hua Qianying asked in surprise. Lu Yi nodded. That is the blood-refining realm where the blood clan lives. More than 10 years ago, it drifted from the starry sky and a war broke out between the 2 realms. In the end, we won and destroyed the blood clan in the blood-refining realm. Then we kept the blood-refining realm. Hua Qianying did not understand. According to Lu Yi, more than 10 years ago, Lu Ye's homeland was only a low-level realm, which meant that the highest cultivation level of cultivators there was only the divine sea. What kind of ability did such a group of cultivators have to destroy the enemy of another realm and keep the enemy's realm as the capital to promote their own realm? Although she did not understand, the facts were in front of her. What made her particularly excited was that she found that Lu Ye's homeland was not as simple as a newly promoted large realm. It was also a rapidly growing realm. There weren't many realms in the entire starry sky that had the ability to devour other realms to strengthen themselves. Hua Qianying could almost foresee that in the future, this realm would definitely stand at the top of the universe in the shortest time possible and become one of the many top realms. This kind of realm was exactly what the World King Flower yearned to attach itself to. Turning his head, Hua Qianying looked at Lu Yi with bright eyes. Fellow Taoist, please make sure the World King Flower stays here. If he missed such a good opportunity, he would probably never encounter it again. If the World King Flower could quickly grow, then the cultivation of the flower race would also rise. The relationship between the flower world and the flower race was different from the relationship between the 9 provinces and the human race. The strength of the flower race was directly related to the foundation of the flower realm. Unlike the human race of the 9 states, once they reached the constellation and entered the starry sky, as long as they had enough talent and cultivation resources, their cultivation could continue to improve. Even if the 9 states remained a large realm in the future, Lu Yi and the others still had hope of advancing to the Sunshine Realm. The flower race could not. If they wanted to advance to the Sunshine Realm, they had to advance to the top realm. Of course there were gains and losses. The cultivation of the flower race was not as difficult as that of the human race. It could be said that once the flower realm became a top realm, there would be almost no bottlenecks for the flower race to cultivate to the Sunshine Realm. They only needed to accumulate enough. That's my wish. Lu Yi smiled. The matter of the World King flower attaching itself to the 9 states was settled. This was definitely a win-win situation. As for whether the name of the 9 states would be exposed to the flower race in the future, that was not important. The flower race did not dare to casually expose their existence in the starry sky. Moreover, once the flower realm and the 9 states merged, they would share a life-and-death relationship. How do we do it? Lu Yi asked. When she collected the World King flower, it was Hua Qianying who gave her pointers. Now, if she wanted the World King flower to attach itself to the 9 states, she would also need her advice. Hua Qianying and Lu Yi talked for a while. Lu Yi understood and took her back to Ao Mountain. The next moment, all the constellations and even the deity sea cultivators who were still in the 9 states heard a voice in their ears. I am Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect of the military province. In half a day, a divine item will be placed in the 9 states, or there will be a strange phenomenon. Everyone, please calm down your disciples and the mortals in your territories. Do not panic. The constellations and the deity sea cultivators all raised their heads and looked in the direction of Ao Mountain of the military province. Now Lu Yi's name was widely known in the 9 states. Even the spirit stream cultivators who had just entered the cultivation world had heard of him. They all knew that he was a legend and the guide of the 9 states. The last time he came back he brought a group of people to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. This time he was going to place a divine item. Even the constellations were curious. They did not know what it was that Lu Yi called a divine item. However, they soon found out. Following a loud buzzing sound, a fresh flower fragrance filled the air. Then, an incredible scene appeared in front of everyone in the 9 states. An illusory flower appeared out of thin air. Then, it expanded rapidly until it covered the sky and the earth. Then it covered the entire 9 states. Millions of people in the land of the 9 states looked at it. No one knew what it was. If Lu Yi had not said something in advance, there would have been a lot of chaos. However, since he had said something, the various sects naturally sent their cultivators to help calm the mortals who did not know what was going on. At this moment, if one looked at the 9 states from the starry sky, there was a huge flower. The 9 states was at the center of the flower. It was like a bright pearl embellished with a dazzling light. This magnificent phenomenon came and went quickly. In just a few dozen breaths of time, the huge flower shadow suddenly disappeared. Cultivators at the divine sea level and below did not notice anything, but the constellations clearly felt that there seemed to be some strange changes in the 9 states. However, no one knew what the changes were. Now, it seemed that only Lu Yi, the initiator, knew about the situation of the flower. However, no one took the initiative to ask because everyone knew that no matter what Lu Yi did, it was for the good of the 9 states. They would know when the time came. In Ao Mountain, Lu Yi's face was slightly pale. Hua Qianying was not much better. She was almost exhausted. Not only her but all the flower people in the flower world were like this. Placing the World King flower in the 9 states was simple. There were no twists and turns in the process, but it was not as easy as it seemed. However, although Lu Yi had consumed a lot of energy, he was much more relaxed. After all, the World King flower had been devouring his soul power. Now that it was free, it was like a burden on his body had been lifted. Naturally, he felt much more relaxed. From now on we will be a family. If you need anything just let me know, Lu Yi said. Hua Qianying responded with a smile. I will not be polite. I will go take a look at the flower world. For the first time, there seems to be some turmoil inside the flower world. Saying so, Hua Qianying opened the door of the flower world and plunged in. Lu Yi thought about it and felt that he should greet the constellations of the 9 states about the flower world. After all, they could be considered to be living together in the future. There would be a lot of interaction between them. He also had to go to the Guardian Palace of the Tian continent. Thinking so, Lu Yi suddenly felt that something was missing. He looked down and found that little 9, who had burrowed into his arms, had disappeared. Lu Yi did not even notice when it disappeared. Little 9? Lu Yi called. The next moment, little 9's voice sounded in his mind. There is something I will tell you later. Lu Yi was confused. What could have happened to this fellow? Why was it in such a hurry? And from its tone it seemed to be a little excited? Lu Yi vaguely felt that Little Nine's matter was related to the flower world. Otherwise it would not be so coincidental. He did not inquire carefully. When Little Nine was done he would naturally know. He turned his head and looked outside the green bamboo peak. At this moment, in front of the green bamboo peak array, two figures came from the bottom of the mountain and stood still. The two of them did not look very old. One was slightly older, about 30 or 40 years old, and the other was younger, about 20 years old. However, their cultivation was not bad. They were both Divine Sea Realm. The older one was at the 7th level of the Divine Sea Realm, and the younger one was at the 5th level. The younger Divine Sea Realm cultivator looked more nervous. He looked around and said in a low voice, "Sect Master, I want to pee." The man who was addressed as Sect Master turned his head and looked at him. "You are already the Vice Sect Master. Why are you still so impatient?" The young man's face was bitter. "I don't want to be the Vice Sect Master. It is you who forced me. How about I resign now?" "How can you resign as a Vice Sect Master?" the Sect Master reprimanded. The young man sighed, "But I am nervous now. Can I go pee first?" The Sect Master comforted him. "Don't be afraid. Senior brother doesn't eat people. Also, don't you respect senior brother the most? Normally you always say that senior brother is your goal. Now that you are about to see the real person, why are you shrinking back? And it's not like you haven't seen him before." The young man was a little dazed. "I only saw him once. At that time I was still young and was only a spirit stream realm cultivator. I didn't know anything. Naturally, the ignorant are fearless. You are not old now. Pull yourself together and straighten your back. You are now considered the most outstanding rising star of our sect. Senior brother has overcome so many difficulties at that time and has even led our sect to the heights it is today. Right now, your cultivation environment is much better than back then. If you don't perform well, see how I will deal with you later." "Who are you going to deal with?" a voice suddenly sounded. Then the array in front of them opened and Lu Ye's figure appeared. He looked at the two people who had suddenly arrived with a smile. Chapter 1695. On the green bamboo peak, the two newcomers looked at Lu Yi with a solemn expression and hurriedly saluted. "Greetings, senior brother." Lu Yi nodded slightly and looked at the older man, his thoughts drifting away. At the Spirit Stream battlefield, he was chased by a guy named Dong Shai and was separated from Hupa. He was seriously injured and drifted down the stream. Ruan Lingyu picked him up and saved his life with Hua Xi's help. That was the first time he met Hua Xi and the others. Although it was more than 20 years ago, the past was still vivid in his mind. Who would have thought that the young man who had been besieged on all sides and hunted down in the Spirit Stream battlefield would now become the guide of the entire 9 states? Kong Yo. The dull man who followed Hua Xi like a guard had now become the sect master of the Jade Blood sect in the War Province. Kong Yo's aptitude was not good. If it was in the past, it would be impossible for him to cultivate to the Divine Sea Realm with his aptitude. He was just a true Lake Realm cultivator. However, as the 9 states became a large world domain, its foundation grew stronger day by day, and the overall cultivation environment became much better than before. As a result, it was much easier for the cultivators of the 9 states to cultivate than it was for Lu Yi. The Jade Blood sect was the sect with the best development in the 9 states over the years. Although Kong Yo's aptitude was not good, his foundation was solid. The changes in the environment, the good cultivation environment, and the abundant cultivation resources were enough for him to be reborn and reach the Divine Sea Realm. Several star mansions of the Jade Blood sect had left the 9 states for the 10,000 Elephant Sea. The sect master had already passed down the position of sect master when they left last time. In the current Jade Blood sect, Kong Yo was the oldest disciple and had a steady temperament. It was not difficult for him to become sect master. Lu Ye's impression of Kong Yo was that he was dull, but after more than 20 years, even the dullest person would become enlightened. Now Kong Yo had the demeanor of a sect master. His youthful dullness had settled into calmness. Although the cultivation of the 7th Order Divine Sea Realm was not high, it was enough for him to be sect master for a few more years. Otherwise, after he became a star mansion, he would have to travel everywhere. Even if he did not go to the 10,000 Elephant Sea, he would have to enter the starry sky often. Lu Yi looked at the young man next to Kong Yo and smiled. "Tang Jian." Tang Jian was stunned. "Senior martial brother knows me?" Of course Lu Yi recognized him. He had actually taken note of this rising star of his sect many years ago. At that time, Tang Jian had only been at the Lingxi sect, but she had already displayed many extraordinary abilities. When he returned this time, Little Nine had mentioned Tang Jian to him. Little Nine didn't pay much attention to other sects. To it, all sects were the same. The only exception was the Blue Blood sect that Lu Yi came from. Of course, it was just paying attention and not paying too much attention to it. After Lu Yi, Blue Blood sect's most outstanding disciple, Tang Jian naturally entered Little Nine's vision. According to Little Nine's words, Lu Ye's current achievements were largely due to the talent tree, but Tang Jian relied entirely on her own ability and talent. In comparison, without the talent tree, Tang Jian's potential was much greater than Lu Ye's. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, he had even earned the nickname of Little One Leaf. The Blue Blood sect's current encampment in the Spirit Stream battlefield's core circle had been won by Tang Jian's group of disciples. Tang Jian had only met Lu Yi once when she was young, so she never thought that this legendary senior martial brother would recognize her. Even though she was now a divine sea cultivator, she couldn't help but feel excited. "Come in and talk," Lu Yi invited her warmly. Kong Niu led Tang Jian into Green Bamboo Peak. Inside the bamboo pavilion, the three senior martial brothers sat down. Ma Shangxi, who had been called over by Lu Yi, served them tea, causing Kong Niu and Tang Jian to feel as if they were sitting on pins and needles. Although the two of them couldn't see through Ma Shangxi's depths, they had still seen many star mansions. The feeling Ma Shangxi gave them was completely incomparable to the star mansions of the 9 provinces. Even if she didn't use any strength or power, Ma Shangxi's peak foundation couldn't be concealed. After chatting for a day, Kong Niu left with Tang Jian. Kong Niu didn't feel much, but when they left, Tang Jian's eyes were bright and filled with a desire to explore the starry sea. Lu Yi didn't talk too much with them, just some general knowledge of the universe. He didn't even give them any pointers on their cultivation. When it came to cultivation, it was impossible to rely on others for pointers. Everyone had their own path of cultivation. If one had enough talent and comprehended it, their path would naturally be smooth. If one didn't have enough talent and couldn't comprehend it, then no matter how strong an external force was, it would be useless. In addition, he told them about the existence of the flower realm. In the future, whether it was the flower race or the wood spirit spore race, they couldn't stay in the flower realm and would definitely move around the 9 provinces. Lu Ye's idea was that the Blue Blood sect could find a way to get in touch with the flower race. It would be best if they could rope in a few flower race members. The flower race might not be outstanding in battle, but they were experts in refining spirit pills. Moreover, when it came to nurturing spirit flowers and rare herbs, there was no other race in the universe that was more outstanding than the flower race. There weren't many flower race members in the flower realm. If the Blue Blood sect could rope in a few in advance, it would be beneficial for the future development of the sect. Although Lu Yi only needed to greet Hua Qianying and he could settle this matter, if he really did this, there would be a hint of wanting to repay the favor. This was not what Lu Yi wanted. What he wanted more was to see the flower race and the human race of the 9 regions living in harmony and helping each other. After Kong Niu and Tang Jian left, Lu Ye's divine sense quickly spread out. With his current cultivation, he could cover the entire 9 provinces with a single thought. In the Heaven Continent, in the Guardian Palace of the 9 provinces, the current Guardian Jianghu was cultivating in seclusion. The position of Guardian sounded good, but in fact, it was a job that no one in the 9 provinces wanted. This was because once one became the guardian of the 9 provinces, they would have to stay in the Guardian Palace all year round and be responsible for collecting all kinds of information brought back by the constellations from the outside world. When necessary, they would also have to pass on some information. It was almost like they were tied to this place. The first guardian of the 9 provinces was Jianghu, the second was Lu Yi, and the third was Feng Wujiang. These 3 had all volunteered to stay in the Guardian Palace. As for the positions after that, they were drawn by lot. No one wanted to be a guardian and be tied to this place. Everyone wanted to enter the starry sky, but the Guardian Palace could not be empty. Everyone could only draw lots and change positions once a year. Zhang Yuan was unlucky. A few months ago he had drawn the lot and could only bitterly stay here. Fortunately, there was no lack of cultivation resources because there were many spiritual jades stored in the Guardian Palace. The guardian who stayed here had the right to use them. The guardian basically had nothing to do. Usually he could only refine the spiritual jades and cultivate. Suddenly, a divine sense spread out. Zhang Yuan immediately opened his eyes and said warily, "Who is it?" But soon his expression became serious. In a short while, information spread out from the Guardian Palace. The constellations of the 9 provinces gradually understood the nature of the strange phenomenon. The flower race, the flower world, the wood spirit race, the spore race. Information that had never been seen before circulated in the constellation plane. The news was naturally spread by Lu Yi through the Guardian Hall. The Flower Realm was now attached to the 9 states. In the future, how the 9 states' constellations would interact with the 3 races in the Flower Realm was no longer Lu Ye's concern. However, no matter what, he had to let them know about the existence of the 3 races so that they could be prepared. Otherwise, if creatures like the Wood Spirit race or the Spore race suddenly appeared in the 9 provinces without any preparation, it might cause a storm. On the green bamboo peak, Lu Yi retracted his divine sense. After thinking for a moment, he pulled out the Panshan saber from its scabbard and placed it on his knees. He lowered his head and looked at it. These days, he had been maintaining the spiritual inscriptions on the saber and had been accumulating magic power. However, today he discovered 2 problems. The first was that this accumulation had a limit. Wang Xiu's secret technique inheritance was, in the end, a ferocious burst of power. This burst of power would be very powerful because it had been accumulated for a long time. In theory, the longer it took to accumulate power, the stronger the burst of power would be. But in reality, this kind of accumulation had a limit. The limit was not the Panshan saber. The Panshan saber was extremely sturdy and could withstand this kind of accumulation. It was far from its limit. The root was the spiritual inscriptions. The spiritual inscriptions had a limit. Every time the magic power circulated in the spiritual inscriptions, it was equivalent to a heavenly cycle. The accumulated power in the spiritual inscriptions would increase by a bit. But when the accumulated power reached a limit, the spiritual inscriptions would show signs of not being able to withstand it. Now Lu Ye's accumulation had reached its limit. He could only maintain the spiritual inscriptions and the accumulated power. It was not good for him to accumulate more power because if he continued, the spiritual inscriptions would collapse. When the spiritual inscriptions that carried the accumulated power were gone, there would be no need to talk about erupting power. If that was all, it would be fine. But the second problem was something Lu Yi could not ignore. Because the spiritual inscriptions were constructed in the Panshan saber, this led to a problem. Once he encountered an enemy and fought with them, whether he wanted to or not, the accumulated power would explode with his first slash. This was not what Lu Yi wanted. Some enemies he could kill with a casual slash. Why would he need to use such an explosive method? When the time came when he encountered a strong enemy, he would not have the means to explode. No wonder Wang Xiu engraved the spiritual inscriptions in the scabbard. Now it seemed that not only could he not construct the spiritual inscriptions as he wished, but there was a deeper level of consideration. Because if the spiritual inscriptions were engraved in the scabbard, when it would explode would depend on the needs of the battle. Therefore it was simple for Lu Yi to solve this problem. Like Wang Xiu, he would create a good scabbard and then engrave the spiritual inscriptions in it. In this way he could save some trouble. He did not need to maintain the spiritual inscriptions at all times. He only needed to inject magic power into it. End of chapter. Chapter 1696. However, this could not be done in the 9 states. Although the 9 states had been promoted to a large realm for more than 10 years, many materials could not be produced in a short period of time. Lu Yi could not find suitable materials to make the scabbard. Perhaps, he could go to the Jade Conch world to take a look? Although the Jade Conch world was not a top realm, it was still a large realm with a long history. The materials produced in the realm were not something the 9 states could compare to. If the 9 states was a wasteland that had just been cultivated, then the Jade Conch world was a piece of fertile land that had been cultivated for many years. The things that grew in the land were different. Moreover, Lu Yi also had the intention to go to the Jade Conch world. He had wanted to go to the Jade Conch world the last time he came back. However, at that time his words did not carry much weight. It was better to let Wu Zhuo do it. Now that he had promoted to Yu Yao to a certain extent, the 9 states had the qualifications to be on par with the Qingli Dao world and the Jade Conch world. Moreover, the cultivators of the 3 realms at the Thousand Elephant Sea lived in harmony and developed together. The momentum was good. Lu Yi felt that it was time to pay a visit to the boss of the galaxy. Now that he had returned by chance, Lu Yi planned to bring some people to the Thousand Elephant Sea to strengthen the forces there. The 3-realm island was very big. There were 300 people in the 9 states and 100 each in the Jade Conch world and the Qingli Dao world. A total of 500 people could not maintain such a large territory. The little constellation hall had always been useful. The 3-realm island was now at least a middle-level spirit island. Later on, it would become a superior-level spirit island. The sooner he brought people there, the sooner he could strengthen the defenses of the Three-Realm Island. Although the Mermaid clan was the most reliable ally of the Three-Realm Island, he could not always rely on others. In the vast cultivation world, only self-improvement was true strength. He made up his mind. When he was done with the matters here, he would make a trip to the Jade Conch world. He could also make a trip to the Qingli Dao world and tell Wuxia about the situation in the Three-Realm Island so that he would not be worried. Without further thought, Lu Yi put away the Panshan saber and took out another item. White Moon Crystal. This item was used to improve the quality of the Dharma source and increase the efficiency of a cultivator's cultivation. Normally speaking, a newly advanced Yu Yao wouldn't need this kind of thing. Every new Yu Yao's cultivation source was basically enough to satisfy her cultivation needs. Only after her strength had improved would she need to upgrade the quality of her cultivation source. Lu Yi was different. If he did not have a talent tree and only relied on refining spirit jades to cultivate, his current source would definitely be enough. However, when he cultivated, he basically relied on the talent tree. His efficiency in refining spirit jades was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare with. Once the spiritual jades were refined and converted into spiritual energy, they would enter the body. Then one spiritual source would be required to convert it into magic power. If the quality of one spiritual source was not high enough, it would naturally not be able to keep up with the requirements of cultivation. In the starry heavens, there were many things that could improve the quality of one source of energy. The White Moon Crystal was only one of them. Its quality was not too good, but it was definitely not bad either. After all, it was something worth 10 or 20 million spirit jades. Refining this thing was very simple, just like refining spirit jades. Lu Yi sat upright and held the White Moon Crystal in one hand, carefully refining it. Very soon, he sensed that there was a warm feeling flowing through his body. That was the mysterious power contained in the White Moon Crystal. This kind of power was obviously fundamentally different from spiritual energy. The warm mystic power flowed into his spiritual source, like a drop of water falling into the sea. Very soon, it merged with his spiritual source, or rather, it was absorbed by his spiritual source. And during this process, the source of the technique was also undergoing slight changes. The external appearance of Lu Ye's spiritual source was a small flame. When the shape of this small flame changed, it was the time that his cultivation had a breakthrough. On the contrary, the quality of his spiritual source did not change the shape of the small flame. However, as the White Moon Crystal was refined, the small flame obviously became brighter. Several days later, the mystic power in the White Moon Crystal was completely consumed, and it became a useless rock. Lu Yi examined himself. His spiritual source was obviously much brighter than before. He was somewhat expectant, so he took out some spirit jades and urged the talent tree to refine them. Silently sensing, he discovered that with his current spiritual source, the efficiency of converting magic power was indeed a little faster than before. However, the speed was not much, only about 10%, which was still far from his requirements. But in the end, this was still a good start. From the looks of it, in the future he still had to find some things that could improve the quality of his spiritual source. When the efficiency of his spiritual source conversion could keep up with his cultivation, then it would be perfect. However, Lu Yi felt that with the terrifying power of the talent tree, even if he upgraded his spiritual source to the highest quality, it would not be enough. He cultivated silently for a few days. On this day, Lu Yi was cultivating when he suddenly sensed that there was some strange movement outside. He hurriedly flashed out. Looking up, he saw a door open and Hua Qianying's figure walked out from it. Since that day, Hua Qianying had returned to the flower world and had not shown herself for the past few days. According to her, there were some disturbances when the flower world was being settled, so she needed to go back and deal with it. Lu Yi did not disturb her. Since she had shown up now, it should be settled. However, Lu Yi saw that her expression seemed to be a little anxious. "What's wrong?" Lu Yi asked with concern. Hua Qianying was indeed a little anxious, and it was the kind of anxiety that came from being lost. She did not bother to be polite with Lu Yi and said bluntly, "Fellow Taoist, please come with me to the flower world." Lu Yi immediately felt that something big must have happened in the flower world. His expression became serious and he stepped forward. Soon he followed Hua Qianying into the flower world. As far as the eye could see, the flower world was still magnificent, like a fairyland full of red and purple, competing with each other for beauty. The realm was peaceful and auspicious. In such a large realm, there were only more than 200 creatures living in it. Looking at the outside world, many precious and rare flowers and plants could be seen everywhere. Lu Yi was a little puzzled. The flower world seemed to be fine. He turned to look at Hua Qianying with a look of inquiry. Hua Qianying said, "Fellow Taoist, can't you feel that the flower world is different from before?" Lu Yi carefully sensed a little more and slowly shook his head. "I can't feel it." Hua Qianying said, "That's true. Fellow Taoist, you are not from this realm, so it is indeed difficult to sense it." "What happened?" Hua Qianying looked at him. "The flower world has given birth to a will." Lu Yi was stunned and even more puzzled. "Isn't this a good thing? In theory, any realm could give birth to its own will of heaven and earth. Of course, according to the realm, the will of heaven and earth would be very different. The vast majority of wills that were born in domains were ignorant and did not possess any thoughts or concepts. They were more like the rules of a domain, unconsciously maintaining the operation of the domain. Such a will of heaven and earth was undoubtedly the lowest level of wills. A very small portion of realms, although still ignorant, had a certain degree of thinking, such as the blood refinement realm. The will of these realms was very repulsive to outsiders. Once they were noticed, a repulsive force would descend, such as heavenly thunder or something. The situation in the 9 states was more special. Little 9 was born from the combination of the will of heaven and earth of the 9 states and the vessel spirit of the Tianji compass. Although it often acted like a child in front of Lu Yi, it was undoubtedly the highest level of will of heaven and earth. Before Lu Yi, it had silently guarded the 9 states for tens of thousands of years. Without its secret protection and concealment, the existence of the 9 states would have been seen by the Qingli Dao world or the Yuluo realm. "It's a good thing." Hua Qianying nodded. As a living creature born in the flower realm, the flower clan could clearly sense the changes in the flower realm. A few days ago, the flower realm suddenly gave birth to its own will of heaven and earth, which surprised Hua Qianying. Once the flower realm had its own will, it would have a huge impact on the development of the entire realm. Especially since the flower realm was now attached to a realm like the 9 states. However, what puzzled her was that, not long after the birth of the flower realm's will of heaven and earth, she could not sense it. It was as if the flower realm's will of heaven and earth had suddenly disappeared into thin air. This made Hua Qianying panic. If the flower realm had not given birth to its will of heaven and earth, it would have been fine. However, now that the flower realm's will of heaven and earth had been born, it had mysteriously disappeared. Hua Qianying did not know what this meant. This matter concerned the entire flower realm. Hua Qianying studied it for several days but did not have a clue. She could only ask Lu Yi for help. In her opinion, Lu Yi had been in the Wanxiang Sea and now came to Yu Yao. He was experienced and knowledgeable and might know something. How could Lu Yi know anything? He didn't notice anything different about the flower world. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "Do you think that there is anything wrong with the flower realm now?" Hua Qianying shook her head. "I haven't found anything yet." It could even be said that the flower realm had only been attached to the 9 states for a few days, but it had already tasted the benefits. In the past, the flower realm was attached to an extremely low-level realm and could not obtain any benefits from that realm. However, it was different now. The flower realm and the 9 states complemented each other and could grow rapidly. Their prospects were promising. However, there was now a problem with the flower realm's will of heaven and earth. This made Hua Qianying very anxious. Since there is nothing wrong, why don't we wait and see? Perhaps the flower realm's will of heaven and earth has fallen into a deep sleep? It's like a newborn child who is addicted to sleep, Lu Yi said casually. Is that so? Hua Qianying was deep in thought. Although she felt that Lu Ye's words were not quite right, she really did not have a solution at the moment. This kind of matter was not something that could be solved by being anxious. Moreover, I see that you can open the realm. This means that there is nothing wrong with the flower realm itself. If something uncontrollable really happens to this realm, I'm afraid that you won't be able to open the realm portal so easily. You have a point. Hua Qianying felt that Lu Yi was right. She could still open the realm portal at will and her connection with the flower realm had not weakened. It was just that she could not sense the flower realm's will of heaven and earth. Perhaps it was just as Lu Yi said. The flower realm's will of heaven and earth had just been born and was relatively weak. It was in a deep sleep. If that was the case, then she only needed to wait. End of chapter. Chapter 1697. After comforting Hua Qianying, Lu Yi returned to the verdant bamboo peak. He planned to cultivate here for a while and consolidate his cultivation. His previous breakthrough was a major breakthrough, But Lu Yi didn't have the time to cultivate, so he couldn't neglect consolidating his cultivation. He had spirit jades and hundreds of thousands of spirit crystals, which were more than enough for him to consolidate his cultivation. The following period was calm and peaceful. Lu Yi spent a total of 300,000 spirit jades to stabilize Yu Yao's cultivation. He didn't continue cultivating. If he really wanted to cultivate, returning to the Myriad Elephant Sea was the best choice. To him, cultivating with the help of spirit jades wasn't very efficient. He planned to go to the Jade Conch realm to see the Yu Yao of the Jade Conch realm and discuss with them before bringing some people to the Myriad Elephant Sea. This matter couldn't be delayed. However, if he really did that, he would have to spend a few years on the road. After all, he could save a lot of time by passing through the ancestral land of the Soul Tribe, but he couldn't bring a large group of constellations with him. Hence, Lu Yi was a little hesitant. He didn't know if he should do that. He didn't need to worry about the Kingdom of the Nine States for the time being. The Flower Realm was attached, and with the addition of Mu He and the Black Umbrella, the defensive power of the Kingdom of the Nine States had increased by quite a bit. Ma Shangxi definitely couldn't stay here. Without Lu Yi watching over her, the heavens were high and the Emperor was far away. Who knew if this vampire would have any thoughts he shouldn't have? Little Nine. Lu Yi called out softly. Before leaving, he still had to say goodbye to Little Nine. However, it was strange. Ever since Little Nine suddenly left last time, it hadn't come looking for him. Lu Yi didn't know what Little Nine was busy with. Little Nine wasn't like this in the past. The space in front of him distorted, and Little Nine in the form of a large white rabbit suddenly appeared. I'm here. What are you busy with? Lu Yi asked casually. Hee hee. Little Nine's smile was a little strange. Nothing, nothing. Lu Yi looked at it in confusion. He felt like something was wrong with Little Nine. At this moment, behind Little Nine's little head, an even smaller head suddenly popped out, and on that even smaller head, there was a little flower-shaped hat. Her skin was fair as if carved from jade, and her small face had distinct facial features. Her large black eyes were filled with curiosity and ignorance as she timidly looked at Lu Yi. Her two small hands were grabbing Little Nine's rabbit ears. Her body was hidden behind Little Nine's head, making it hard to see her clearly. Lu Yi was stunned. After looking at the pair of eyes for a moment, Lu Yi asked in confusion, "What is this?" He had never seen such a creature before. What made Lu Yi even more curious was that he couldn't sense any aura of a living creature from the other party. Xiao Jiu's expression was clearly a little embarrassed as he explained to Lu Yi, "My new friend, Huan Yang." New friends? Lu Yi was confused. Little Jiu actually made friends? One had to know that in the 10,000 years of protection of the 9 provinces, only Lu Yi himself and the city lord of the celestial origin city knew of Little Nine's existence. The others, even Feng Wujiang, only had some suspicions and had never truly seen Little Nine. Little Nine actually made a new friend in the 9 prefectures? Lu Yi couldn't even tell what race this Huan Yang belonged to. Huan Yang, he's Lu Yi, the one I told you about. Don't be afraid, he's a good person. Little Nine said to Huan Yang. Huan Yang then stood up straight. But even if she stood up straight, she was only a few inches tall. She was obviously hiding behind Little Nine's head just now. Huan Yang was wearing a hat that looked like a blooming flower on her head and a green skirt on her body. However, rather than saying that it was a skirt, it was better to say that it was a combination of leaves. However, it looked seamless and fit her body very well. Even Huan Yang's slim waist was outlined. Ah! Huan Yang opened her mouth and made a sound. She didn't seem to know how to speak. However, Lu Yi felt that she should be greeting him, so he nodded at her. Lu Yi looked curious and was about to ask where Little Nine made this new friend. Suddenly, he looked at Huan Yang seriously and then looked at Little Nine. His eyes moved back and forth between Huan Yang and Little Nine several times. The corner of Lu Yi's eyes twitched. Squeezing out a harmless smile, Lu Yi said, "Huan Yang, I want to talk to Little Nine about something. You go play first." Huan Yang tilted her head and looked at Lu Yi with a pair of ignorant eyes. Little Nine shook his body and said, "You wait for me on the side." Huan Yang obediently climbed down from Little Nine's body. Her movement was very difficult. When she fell to the ground, she accidentally fell, which made Lu Yi's eyelids jump. After Huan Yang came down, Lu Yi picked up Little Nine and turned around to enter the bamboo house. "What's wrong?" Little Nine saw Lu Yi's sneaky appearance as if he couldn't see anyone, and was somewhat at a loss. Lu Yi squatted down and looked at him with a serious expression. "You tell me honestly, your new friend, where did she come from?" Little Nine rolled his eyes. "I picked her up." Fart. Lu Yi raised his hand and pointed at his head. Do you really think I can't see anything? Huanyang has an aura similar to yours. At first, Lu Yi didn't see anything and was still guessing what race Huanyang came from. His experience was not shallow now, but he had never seen a race like Huanyang. Until he suddenly noticed that Huanyang had an aura similar to Little Nine's. Hee. Little Nine smiled awkwardly. You already know, why are you still asking? Really? Lu Yi was stunned. Even if he had guessed it, when Little Nine admitted it, he still couldn't believe it. Huanyang is the will of the flower world? And that's right. Little Nine readily admitted. Lu Ye's heart trembled. For a moment he didn't know what to say. The truth was out. A few days ago, Hua Qianyin came to him to ask about the will of the flower world. She said she couldn't feel the existence of the will of the flower world. Lu Yi naturally thought that the will of the flower world had just been born and had fallen asleep, so Hua Qianyin couldn't feel it. But in fact, this was not the case at all. Not only did the flower world give birth to the will of the flower world, but it was also the same as Little Nine, giving birth to an extremely high-level will of the flower world. With Huanyang by Little Nine's side, it would be strange if Hua Qianyin could feel it in the flower world. Do you know that this is abduction? Lu Yi looked at Little Nine speechlessly. This child has just been born and you already abducted her out of the house. How can you do this? Her parents are very worried. Little Nine felt wronged. How could that be? I helped Huanyang's birth, so she is very close to me. I am preparing to send her back to the flower world after a period of time. Lu Yi looked at him from the corner of his eyes. How long is a period of time? Little Nine stammered. AI. Lu Yi sighed. He didn't have the heart to scold him too much. Little Nine had always been alone until he appeared. Only then did he have someone to talk to, but ever since he left the 9 regions he had become alone again. Now Huanyang had appeared, and in essence she was an existence of the same nature as Little Nine. The World King Flower was attached to the 9 regions, so there was a natural closeness between them. For a will that had been alone for tens of thousands of years, the sudden appearance of such a companion naturally made it more cherished. Recently Little Nine had disappeared without a trace. Lu Yi thought it was because he noticed that he was cultivating and didn't come to disturb him. It turned out that he had a new friend. This guy liked the new and forgot the old. What do you mean by you helped Huanyang's birth? Lu Yi asked again. Little Nine quickly explained. The World King Flower was placed in the 9 regions and attached to the 9 regions. In the process of fusing with each other, the World King Flower undoubtedly obtained some benefits, and these benefits promoted the birth of the will of the flower world. If there was no external interference, then the will of the world born in the flower world would only be the most basic will of the world. It wouldn't have its own thoughts and it wouldn't be able to take form. But at that time, when the will of the flower world was about to be born, Little Nine sensed it and secretly gave it a push. With this push Huanyang was born. In this process, Little Nine exerted a lot of effort, and it also caused a lot of damage to the foundation of the 9 regions. Therefore, the birth of Huanyang was not an inevitable result. It was basically Little Nine's credit. As a result, after the birth, Huanyang naturally had a great sense of intimacy with Little Nine. In recent days, the 2 wills of the world had been together. The snacks that Lu Yi brought back for Little Nine were all given to Huanyang by Little Nine. After Lu Yi heard this, he couldn't help but smile with joy. For some reason, he felt as if his mischievous brat had kidnapped a beautiful young lady from the outside. Although he felt a little sorry for the girl, the rice had already been cooked. Speaking of which, Little Jiao, are you a male or a female? Lu Yi asked as she reached out to examine Little Jiao. Little Nine dodged in embarrassment and said shyly, I am the combination of the will of the world and the artifact spirit. How can there be a male or female? That's true, whether it was Little Nine or Huanyang, they were both abnormal creatures. There really wasn't any distinction between male and female. Although Huanyang looked like a little girl, it was just an external image. There's no need for you to be so sneaky. Just tell me directly. Lu Yi said again. The birth of Huanyang was not a bad thing. Hua Qianyin would definitely be very happy if she knew. Now that she couldn't perceive the will of the world of the flower world, she probably wouldn't be able to sleep and eat well these days. I'm not sneaky. Little Nine was still stubborn. Forget it. My child was just born and you took her away. Now you have to return her. Little Nine seemed a little unhappy. Fool. Lu Yi rubbed his head. The flower world is attached to the 9 regions. You and Huanyang can meet whenever you want. The flower clan can't stop you. What are you afraid of? In this small piece of land, There's no other will of the world that can snatch your love. What do you mean snatch my love? Little Nine tried to defend himself, his rabbit face turning red. Lu Yi chuckled. This was also good. When he was outside he had always been thinking about Little Nine. Now that there was Huan Yang, Little Nine would not be lonely in the future. End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.